Good evening, and welcome to a slightly differently set up version of Deep Space Wine. This is a long-running Star Trek podcast in which Kat, a wide-eyed newcomer to the world of Deep Space Nine and watching for the first time, is watching alongside myself, a grizzled old veteran fan who remembers DS9 when it was first shown in the UK in the mid-90s. Each couple of weeks, we go through an episode together and talk about what we liked, didn't, and go through it in a scene-by-scene basis. And tonight's episode is Dax, and I will hand over to my trusty co-pilot, Kat, to give us a summary of tonight's episode.
Awesome sauce. Hi, everybody. Now, firstly, a content warning. There isn't very much in this episode in terms of content warnings. It's a very dialogue-heavy episode, but there is a kidnapping near the beginning of it, and there is reference to a murder that happened long ago later on, but nothing explicit. Now, firstly, for the sake of anyone who's unfamiliar with the Star Trek species Trill, a Trill is a person made up of a combination of a symbiont, which is a worm-like thing, about yay big, and a host, usually a humanoid person. And the symbiont is surgically added to the body of the host, and the two personalities become combined into one person. When the host body is dying, the symbiont is moved on to a new host. Lieutenant Jadzia Dax is one such Trill, a young woman, Jadzia, who recently became the host for the symbiont, Dax. And after having a meal with Dr. Bashir, Lieutenant Dax is abducted by a group of aliens while walking back to her quarters. Dr. Bashir alerts Commander Sisko that she has been taken, and the Deep Space Nine crew is able to prevent the abductors from leaving the station. One of the abductors, Ilan Tandro, accuses Dax, that is, the Dax symbiont, then, in the body of Curzon Dax, of murdering his father, General Ardalon Tandro, a famous military hero from Clystron 4. Ilon wants to punish Jadzia Dax for the crime. His claim is based on the fact that during a civil war, a coded message informing the opposite side of his father's location and of the people who knew the location, Curzon was the only one without an alibi. Major Kira insists that Dax cannot be extradited to Clystron without an arbitration hearing under Bajoran law. They hold this hearing, and at that hearing, Sisko argues that Jadzia and Curzon Dax are two completely different individuals, sparking a lengthy debate. The arbiter suggests removing the Dax symbiont and leaving Jadzia behind, but Dr. Bashir says that neither of them would survive the operation. Ilon argues that failure to punish Trill symbionts for acts committed in past lifetimes would create a perfect crime. Curiously, although her fate is uncertain, Jadzia seems complacent about the entire affair. She refuses to say anything in her defense. Meanwhile, DS9 Security Chief Odo visits Ilon's mother and the wife of the deceased general, Inina Tandro. She tells him that Tandro's murder inspired his people to victory, and he has since become a worldwide hero, but she is adamant that Curzon did not betray her husband. Odo discovers evidence of an affair between Curzon and Inina, giving him a motive for the murder of her husband. Inina admits the affair to Odo and tells him that her husband was not the hero in life that he was in death. As the hearing resumes, Inina testifies that at the time of the murder, Curzon was in her bed. Oh my! And the arbiter dismisses the case. After the hearing is over, Inina talks privately with Dax of how no one must ever know that her husband had sent the coded message himself in an attempt to betray his own people, and that the rebels killed him for the favor. So yeah, that's the episode.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Kat, as always, for an exemplary summary, which we openly admit we pinned from Wikipedia because
seriously, we've tried writing our own summaries and you just end up repeating the entire episode. It can be done.
So for anyone new to the stream, that is something we often struggle with. We're not brief people, Kat. We have a lot to say and we like to share it with you all. So a brief summary was also not easy to concoct. So, no shame here. Using Wikipedia as the resource.
Open source information. Why reinvent the wheel?
Precisely. Or the turbo lift, or the transporter, or any kit like that. So, a courtroom episode, which is a hallmark Star Trek trope. It's very recognisable in many episodes from TNG. It was very much part of the very first Star Trek original series episode. So, I think we're on very familiar ground. Here we are in Series 1. We're still finding our feet, establishing the characters. So, an interesting choice, I thought. Initial impressions, Kat, please take me away.
I'm going to save my overall feeling about the episode until we've done the summary, because otherwise I'm giving everything at the beginning. But yeah, you're right. They emphasize several times during this episode that it's not a trial. No one's on trial here.
Yes.
The decision they're trying to make is whether or not to send Jadzia for trial. And that felt a little cheesy, because it felt a little... It's not a trial episode. We're not doing that again. This is different. And it really ain't all that different.
It really is. That is a paper thin, disguise. Because the whole episode does revolve around them assessing in a court of law this very integral question of where's the line between hosts? What is a Trill symbiont responsible for versus their host? So it feels like such an unnecessary and paper thin masquerade. And
they're trying to make massive decisions which might impact the lives of many people, and it's a little hearing that happened to come up when this thing was suddenly unearthed. But shall we take it scene by scene? I was
just going to say you're absolutely right. So I will kick us off if you don't mind, and just notice this is a Chief O'Brien missing episode. Chief O'Brien has taken Keiko away to Earth. And we are back on that now familiar topic of Deep Space Nine does not run very, very well. It is a bit of a dilapidated station, and the crew are struggling to keep the systems operating, which I just thought was a nice callback.
I must admit, when they said that Chief O'Brien wasn't aboard the station, I assumed that the episode was going to revolve around technical difficulties.
Right.
But that would have been too obvious, perhaps.
Yes.
I also liked the reference to he's gone back to Earth because it is Keiko's mother's 100th birthday, which we can assume is a regular occurrence at this point in time, whereas for us it's very rare.
Yes, absolutely. I think there was a TNG episode where Beverly Crusher met an old mentor, and he was like, "Oh, it's time to retire. I'm 127," and I was like, "Not bad, not bad at all. Very, very good innings." But yes, it was a nice little...
his choice to continue working and not that it's been fostered.
100%. I don't think Starfleet would actually be leaving people out of the care homes and being like, back into space, back into dangerous situations. God, I would hope not anyway. I would certainly hope not.
I haven't seen Picard yet, so who knows?
No spoilers. That is always rule one for anyone joining the stream new. Kat has not seen.
John Luke, you've run out of money. Get back out there.
Yes, no spoilers, please. Absolutely.
But yes, in the very first scene, Bashir says that it's almost as if the refiltration processes were waiting for Chief O'Brien to leave before breaking down, which is a nice lamp shading.
It certainly is. But otherwise, it's quite a painful date. Well, it's not even a date. I think... Dax is reading some technical notes and just sitting with a colleague, and Bashir, obviously... I get the impression that he thinks he's on a date.
I've written down one of the lines that Bashir says to her. He has to she'd like another Ractogino, and Dax, who is busy working on these papers, just says, "It'll keep me up all night." And Bashir responds, "I can think of better ways of keeping you up, and they're more fun than drinking Klingon coffee." And actually, he's such an unrepentant fuckboy.
Oh, absolutely the worst. And this is something I think we have to struggle with, and we've talked about it, is Deep Space Nine was written in the 90s, and it still has certain 90s sitcom tropes in it, and one of them is that's how men flirt with women they're interested in. It's grotesque.
And as the scene progresses, it turns into that trope whereby if a man is rebuffed by a woman, however gently or forcefully, the thing he does is he keeps trying to demonstrate how much he likes her and how much he deserves her. And it's cringeworthy as heck to watch now.
It really is. And this is something, we have made a note of in previous episodes. I noted that Bashir says, not encouraged, but not expressly forbidden. And I was like, wow, these days that would absolutely be a red line, past a red line, that
absolutely. He's offered to accompany Jadzia back to her quarters, and she says no thanks. And as soon as she's gone, it's like, not encouraged, but not forbidden. And then dashes after her. Yeah. Which actually turns out to be helpful in this situation because she's about to get abducted.
Absolutely. I did make a note as well that I was a bit annoyed with that, because now it's seen as he's a saviour for doing it. Like he knows better, and it's like, right? One, that's bullshit. And two, everybody on the station is constitutionally incapable of seeing the hooded figures lurking behind every grill. I mean, I love that about Deep Space Nine's design. You wouldn't get that on the Enterprise, but Deep Space Nine, there are so many shadowy corners in which to lurk, like you're in the tavern at the beginning of
It's
a
wonderful. And the
RPG.
cameras follow them. We don't look through the grill at them.
No.
We see from their point of view where Jadzia is sitting out on the promenade. It's got a lot of creative camera work for a mainly talk-based episode.
Which I do think is a bit of a habit that Deep Space Nine established. We've talked about this in other episodes. Just good camera angles, slightly changing it a bit from conventional, say, TNG shots, you might imagine.
Yeah, so, it feels as if everyone involved is doing their craft very creatively. It doesn't feel as if there's necessarily one hand behind it saying, we're going to do it this way. It feels as if everyone's pitching in, which also feels like what's happening on screen with our cast. It's nice.
It is. It makes a pleasant change.
But yes, I did note that when Jadzia is walking away from the promenade, Bashir is actually seated such that he can see that hooded figures leave a corridor and follow her. Plot-wise, they could have had him go, I'll just follow and make sure that she's okay. It might still have felt unwarranted, but it would have worked. I guess we can say he's not being xenophobic here. He doesn't see a hooded figure and instantly assume they're up to no good. But they are.
I was going to say, I've got to admit, that seems like a bit of a survival lack on Deep Space Nine, where hooded people so far have always been up to trouble, Yeah,
I think last episode we had the people who wear a blue scarf around their head, who were just attending an auction to buy ill-gotten goods. But yeah, whenever you see someone who looks deeply suspicious, it's because they are.
I've got to admit, they are very much, it's not very complex at the moment. They very much signpost their enemies, but, they will get better, I trust. So let's get into the only action sequence of the episode. And it starts with Bashir wandering around the corner with just this incredible gormless expression on his face. Something seems to be happening. And he has to take a good long look at Jadzia, struggling in the arms of two men. A man and a woman. And Jadzia! Oh no, he says Dax, doesn't he? And he comes belting down the corridor.
And that distracts them, and one of them goes to attack him. And unfortunately, because it's filmed in a corridor, I think they struggled with a problem whereby they didn't want Jadzia to be moving further away from Bashir while he was fighting. They wanted to keep them all in the same part of the corridor because it looks extremely unnatural. She's being held one arm each and a hand over her mouth by her two captors, and they're just holding her still. They're not taking her anywhere because they're just waiting.
They're waiting
for their third member to finish fighting Bashir, and it just looks really staged. I think it's possibly because they were filming in a narrow corridor and the camera could not run up and down the corridor between the two. But it's unfortunate because it is the only action scene in it, and it looked unusually for an episode that makes such good use of camera work. It feels a bit staid and a bit unnatural. She's just standing there pretending to fight for a few minutes while we wait for Bashir to.
Oh no! I'm increasingly.
Then Bashir, oh no, I'm still struggling. I'm still here. And when Bashir is knocked out, it's because the person he's fighting removes their hood, and he's surprised to see that they're a woman. So instead of punching, he pauses for a moment and looks gormless, and she knocks him out. Because, yes, it's actually quite nice. Don't be sexist, Julian. Women can fight, and they're gonna punch you. Maybe you shouldn't be so forward with Dax all the frickin' time.
So you're saying it's an immediate karmic retribution for Bashir?
It feels that way now. I don't know if it was intended that way, but it pleases me to think so.
I think you might be right. Yes, absolutely. I would like to think that Bashir comes around the corner, swings into action as the hero, and he lamps the first chap. What's his name? Elon Tundra, the leader.
Is it Elon or Ilon?
I think it might depend on your pronunciation. On Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, it is ILON. But your pronunciation
I think it was pronounced Ilon because I didn't think about Musk at any point during the episode, so
Thank
I think
heavens.
It must be Ilon.
Thank heavens, what a lovely break.
So it's going to be Ilon regardless.
Let's say Ilon, certainly. And Ilon, and weirdly enough, Bashir both go crashing into the wall because Bashir hits him so hard they both kind of tumble. And then it all goes wrong. Bashir thought he was going to be saviour and instead gets absolutely pounded the moment he hesitates, as you say. So it's a nice bit of retribution.
And it just makes me dislike him. He's just so useless and so sexist.
He is. This is a bit of a
Bashir.
step backwards for silly, naive Julian Bashir.
And it's an argument for bringing Garak back so he can get some proper character development going on.
I'm just going to sneeze.
Oh no! Lack of a sneeze button. That's right.
We need a quick mute. Yes, we've already talked about the fact that poor Garak has not been recognised for the gem he is, and will not return until season 2. So we are hanging on.
Episodes to go.
I know, we are hanging on. They will repay him in time. Do not worry about that. So, Julian Bashir has been brushed aside like the annoying gnat he is, and our abductors flee through the station in a very, what I thought was surprisingly well-coordinated, tense pursuit, whilst the crew and ops try and stop them with doors and force fields and the tractor beam, and, bit by bit, these advantages that the crew normally have been removed, which I thought really upped the stakes very quickly.
It's very nice. I really enjoyed that scene, the point of view from ops, which opens with them talking about I think it wasn't a flux in the graviton field this time. It was.
You're incredible with the technobabble. I'm just in awe that you always recall it.
I really like it. This time there was a flux. No, see, I can't even remember what it was.
That sounds right. It was. Was it a flux in the graviton generator?
It was a residual charge in the graviton generator.
There we go. I knew it was that pesky generator.
At the start of the scene, Sisko and Kira are very calmly talking about what looks like a graviton flux in the whatever it was that I just said.
Yes.
Residual charge in the graviton generator. And by the end of the scene, it turns out that that's because the people who've just come on board have disabled the tractor beam. It's just so nice. They wrap it up very nicely. The technical thing that they've already noticed is happening because of something they were not yet aware of. It just feels like very careful crafting of the scene and use of technobabble to fill out the world and make it feel more real to us.
Absolutely.
And then it is a really nice little bit of, as you say, just kind of the push and pull of, they can see that the captors seem to know their way around the ship, so they turn on force fields. Shortly after they've enabled the force fields, one of the captors opens up a panel, presses some buttons, and disables the force field, and they carry on. It's real cat and mouse stuff.
I thoroughly enjoyed it for that, because it is everything we've taken for granted in shows like TNG. Oh, you can stop them with a force field, lock a door, put the tractor beam on them. And it's the way these people have categorically anticipated each move our fearless Starfleet crew will make, and anticipated it, which also puts a bit more danger into the very back of the episode, which is they got this information somehow. They know how to get around DS9, and Kira's going to touch on it later, but they know how to get around DS9. They know how to subvert its systems. So there's an extra little layer of danger there, just a little.
Yeah, the whole station is perhaps less safe, given that so many people come and go, and some of those people, have that information.
Bingo.
And Kira doesn't have a huge amount to do in this episode, but the bits that she has, I feel, are quite powerful.
Superb. Very good for her.
In this scene, she's telling Sisko very quickly that if they know their way around the ships, then they probably also know what the warp capability of our shuttles are. So they've probably got an alternative mode of transport. So they know that they've got to narrow down the escape vessel to one of the vessels that's docked that has a higher than warp 3 capability.
Good thinking. I love that.
It's just so nice, because I think a lot of the time Star Trek has historically relied on magic, effectively. One member of the crew will just have an idea, just be able to automatically lock everything, make it, as you've said, just force fields drop, make things happen. In this case, they're going through their technical capabilities.
Exactly. Rather than just reversing the polarity of the positron surge through the main navigational deflector, which has solved the day about 20 times in TNG. I'm sorry, TNG. We love TNG. Kat is watching TNG parallel to this, so.
But it is fantasy adventure for most of the time, rather than hard sci-fi. Whereas this feels more. It feels more technical, even if it's technically magic. It is magic based in what was known of astronomy at the time and astronomical physics.
I'll give you that. It's good world building. It hews to stuff we have already established works in Star Trek, and it's a little bit of extra detail for that sort of sad fan who's like, well, actually, I think you'll find warp factors are higher than that. And it's like, oh, well, actually, we've thought about you, superfan, and here's why that's not going to work. And it's great. It's attention to detail, which so far DS9 has, I think, safe to say, not really let us down on. The writers are clearly
absolutely
paying attention to detail. So, finally, DS9 managed to get the tractor beam working. Sisko bit of virtuoso piano playing on the console there. Manages to
he discharges the
snag
residual
them.
graviton charge and gets the beam working again.
I'm
Heck
going
yeah.
to always throw to you for a Technobabble line now. That is brilliant.
And then I'm going to spend 5 minutes finding it in my document. Yay!
Well, Cat's Technobabble works, and Cisco hauls the ship in, and security takes them prisoner, at which point the slimy, really unlikable Elon Tandro says, I have an arrest warrant here from Klystron 4. And I always bump on this because they do it elsewhere in Star Trek where the residents of a world refer to their world as Klystron 4. Even though we don't refer to our world as Sol 3, we call it Earth. So presumably the people from Klystron 4 have their own word for it.
Well, it's the universal translator at work.
You are relying too much on Technobabble now. You're relying too much.
There are a couple of things I really liked in the mechanics of that scene. Firstly, as they step out of their vessel, Odo says, extremities where I can see them. Not hands, because he doesn't assume that these aliens are necessarily going to have them. He wants whatever they have with which they can manipulate weapons. I thought that was just a really nice little touch. And I also really liked the physicalness of handing over a small console that has the arrest warrant details on it, because we later see that warrant again in the hearing itself. Yes, it's picked up by the Arbiter. So again, rather than relying on the information's been passed along somehow, they've seen it on a screen somewhere. We've got a very definite, no, this is where the information lies. This is who's looking at it. Yes, absolutely. And it just lends that bit more reality to the world that we're engaging with.
No, I enjoyed that as well. And it gave a certain kind of like weight to the scene as well when this guy Elon actually hands let's call him Elon gives Cisco it, and it's like, here it is, here is the physical passport that allows us to take Dax, and he says we have a unilateral arrest warrant. And already my mind was like, whoa. I understand, extradition treaties can be pretty permissive, but you can't just like duff someone up and duff somebody else up along the way and then just nick them. And
when you had the warrant anyway, why do that?
Well, this is it.
And we're about to find out.
We are about to find out. Take us away, because I think my notes don't come in a bit later.
Oh, certainly. Let's have a look. So Odo has a look at the warrant which says the Dax was responsible for the death of General Ardalon Tandro 30 years ago. Oh no! Ardalon Tandro died as long ago as this episode was transmitted.
I don't need to hear this. I don't need to hear these horrible facts. Oh Lord, that is a terrifying number. Okay, moving swiftly on.
But yes, yeah, I'm not struggling to find in my notes where Cisco says, why the heck did you do this?
They're in the office. It's Cisco and Dax looking at why on Earth... it's Cisco and Odo looking at why on Earth Dax has been targeted by the Klystrons for extradition. And it is, yes, for treason and murder of a celebrated war hero on Klystron. And I know... is this where Cisco says... Curzon had more faults than the usual socially acceptable Trill, which I thought was such a lovely line. And is a nice little bit of character building for a character we really don't ever see.
Yeah, we know that he had a mentor relationship with Cisco. And I think Cisco has talked about them going drinking together.
That's right.
I think they were at bull racing or something akin to it.
Yes.
But yes, otherwise we know very little about him. So it is nice that we get a little bit more fleshing out of Curzon Dax in this episode.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed that as well. And it is going to be a large exploration of that relationship, which is good. On the flip side, after that lovely glowing line, Odo, ever the, stern protector of the law, is like, because Cisco says, I knew the man. He wasn't a murderer or a traitor. And Odo just turns to him and says, did you know the symbiont inside the man? And it's just, wow.
And you're on the theme of the episode.
Precisely. Odo, the great security chief is already moving to the heart of the problem. He can already think, well, I know Trills and I know that they're different. The symbiont is one, the host is the other. And that is the basis of the episode. So I was really impressed that Odo just got that chance to highlight what was coming right up in that touching first scene.
Straight in there. And then we've got a scene in Dax's quarters where I really liked the layout of the quarters.
Yes, I noticed
as you
that.
walk in, the door is at the back of the room as we're looking at it, where next to Dax, where she has been lying on her bed, and there is a set of clear shelves between her and the rest of the room. So there are various ornaments on them, but you can look through. So Cisco approaches from our point of view, the back of the room, the door, walks up towards her. She sits up on her bed, and as the camera angles between the two of them, there is an impression that she's already behind bars because he's looking through these shelves as she's sitting on a very sparse looking bed. If it wasn't intentional, it's just a really nice coincidence. But it's just creative. You could have had a room set up with a bed anywhere, and he could just have looked at her with nothing between them, but instead there's a physical object between them, marking both the possibility of her being in prison and the barrier of her being a different Dax now. A film student could go to town on this. It's great.
And they absolutely could and should. I also bumped on it, and for me, it was as well the barrier between them, because Dax is going to be incredibly incommunicative in this episode, and that kind of tentative new friendship she was forming with Cisco as Jadzia carrying Dax's knowledge seems to go completely in reverse, and Dax is just going to hold Cisco beyond arm's length, just pushing him away. So that barrier between them felt like such an image, a symbol for how this whole episode's going to play out, where Dax is always going to have a barrier between what actually happened and her colleagues, her friend, her oldest, bestest friend. So I think very intentional.
Very nice, very astute. And yes, in that scene, let's see what happens. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, there's one line I really liked in that scene when they're talking about the friendship that they had between them. Jadzia points out that that Cisco knew Curzon Dax for 20 years. She's Jadzia Dax now. And Cisco replies, so when the Dax part of you survived from one host to the next, it really didn't take our friendship along. Which, ooh, ouch.
Yeah.
And Jadzia responds, Benjamin, you know that you're still my very dear friend.
Yes, that was it.
Yeah. I really like the building of that relationship between these two, because we're only on episode 7 and we've got a relatively large cast of characters to deal with. And we have already bumped into the fact that Cisco has known Curzon Dax for many years, and now suddenly he is a 28-year-old woman, so much younger than Cisco, less experienced than Cisco, but also carrying the memories of Dax, the person he knew ages ago. And I like how this episode both keeps that at arm's length, as you've said. Jadzia doesn't engage with Cisco much in this episode and keeps pushing us towards it.
It is a wonderful way to take something you thought you were getting used to. Oh, okay, they're going to be friends because they were friends before, and twists it, takes it away and goes, no, that's not happening. And you're left in the dark. You don't know why on earth, the usual warm, gregarious, friendly Dax is just this distant, cold, very sad, very perceptibly sad person who's clearly wrapped up in a painful memory, the pain of this developing friendship with Cisco. It's very visible, written on Terry Farrell's lovely expressive face, that she is, really struggling with this, and I liked it as well. I thought it was great relationship building.
And I think Terry Farrell does a really good job throughout this episode, because it could have been deeply frustrating to watch, because Jadzia refuses to tell anyone, including Cisco, whether she committed the murder that Curzon Dax is being accused of. She presumably remembers it, but she won't say. So for the entire episode, almost right up to near the end, Terry Farrell's just got to sit there looking ambivalent. Look as if you could have committed the murder, but not necessarily as if you did, but look as though you're sad about something and also worried. And she does a really good, exactly, but she does a very good job of it.
I thought so, yeah.
Which can't have been easy.
No, she had very little to work with, and so I think she made her expression work really hard during this episode. I think it worked quite well. But I will acknowledge that Dax had a very narrow scope of what to do in this episode. On the flip side of that, can I move us to Cisco's first meeting in his office with Kira and Ilon, where Cisco says, if you had this arrest warrant, I couldn't work out why you were so subversive and you abducted my officer. And then I realised this is a Bajoran station. It's not a Federation station. We're just looking after it for the Bajorans. You don't have an extradition treaty with Bajor. You think if you'd have presented the warrant, they would have rejected it. And you know what? They probably would. And of course they would. Cue Kira. Oh,
I
you
love
said
Kira
not
in
much in
this
this
scene.
episode, but in this scene, isn't she brilliant?
She looks so smug. It's brilliant. And it's really nice to have a scene where Sisko and she are completely aligned in their purpose.
Yes.
They both want to prevent this guy from extraditing Jadzia. They're both annoyed that he tried to get around it by going behind the backs of the Bajoran authorities. So yes, Sisko turns questioning over to Kira, who asks Tandro how he knew his way around the station so well.
Which we were wondering.
And very heartily he replies that his conversations with the commander, and Sisko ducks in to correct him. No, your conversations with my first officer now. And the grin on Kira's face.
Mischief. I've actually
written wicked. I love it.
Yeah, wicked. I got mischievous, gleeful mischief.
Yes.
And I love
absolutely. And she's got good reason to look very pleased that this guy's being put in his place. She says that the Klystrons are allies of the Cardassians, and that Tandro's knowledge of the station confirms that Cardassia must have given him the layout of DS9, which compromises Bajoran security, but also annoys us.
I love it. Oh, yeah. So good.
It's great, angry mischief smiling she's doing at this scene. It's wonderful.
It's brilliant, and it does make sense. You can imagine the Cardassians thinking, "Here's a way to cause some trouble on this really."
Yeah, they've every reason to give away the layout of the station to the Klystrons.
And so it does actually give a pretty solid foundation, at least for Kira to initiate this request for it to go to arbitration. So I liked it. They could have just found some other shortcut way, but this, again, felt like a good, nice little bit of world building.
So it does. It ties it back to some of the major themes of DS9 around Bajor and the Cardassian occupation. It's very nicely nests this. Otherwise, it's a story that doesn't. It just kind of sits on its own.
Yes.
In many ways, and it ties it into the wider world. Which, I'm going to use the word "nice" far too often in this episode, but it is. It's really nice. It's
nice. It's nice what they've done. So,
and I really like Sisko's use of bureaucracy here, because he's effectively what he's doing is trying to find a way of stalling until they can work out whether or not Dax committed this murder, so they know how best to support Jadzia, because Jadzia isn't damn well saying anything. And I like the way that he's seeking a way of interpreting the law so that it serves his own needs. It feels very chaotic neutral of him, when usually I see him as being quite law-abiding as the face of the Federation.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But this is... When the battleground's already been drawn by the Klystrons, and they're like, we're going to use the fact that this is an extradition treaty, he's like, I've got to fight them on this battleground, so I'm going to use my knowledge of the law, my access to the fact that this is a Bajoran and not a Federation station. I'm going to fight you on that battleground, and then you can't get out of it then, you know. And he's also got to be thinking as well, you know, I can't just punch this guy in the face and throw him out an airlock. He's got a treaty with the Federation. His people have a treaty with the Federation. I've got to maintain some, like, you know, simulacrum of diplomatic nicety to the guy, you know. So
to be fair, he's only won so far, I think, resorted to punching a guy in the face, and it was a guy who thoroughly deserved it.
And not for the last time, but no spoilers here. So I have the next scene is Odo and Quark in the bar.
That's right.
Another great scene with some gleeful mischief, I thought.
Absolutely, because Odo is trying to persuade Quark to give up the bar so that they can use the space for the hearing. And obviously Quark doesn't want to shut his business down for the day.
Can I just observe as well, this is a little bit jarring early installment weirdness, because Deep Space Nine is big. It's very big. It does have a lot of rooms. Are you telling me the only place is the bar? And the reality...
They don't have meeting rooms, because there's only half a dozen people involved in this hearing.
You know, you could do it in Sisko's office, for God's sake, couldn't you? And I think if you dig into this, the reality behind it will be they only had about 3 sets for DS9. Ops, the bar promenade, and like one other set of corridors, I think. They just didn't have another set. So they were like,
the promenade set is quite a large one in terms of it takes up at least 2, I think it takes up 3 stories of space.
Yeah.
which is built in real space. You can
Yeah.
travel along them,
You
see the cameras
absolutely
moving
can.
along them.
You absolutely can.
So, and I think
So weird though.
I think though the fact that they use the bar space very judiciously. It looks really good. It looks really good during the hearing scene. They set up the arbiter against the backdrop of that beautiful red and yellow image that you see at the start of this very podcast, and it looks very official. It looks good, despite it being a space where people play Dabo and get pissed. It looks right for it. They make use of the set.
I will give you that. It does make sense from that point of view that the bar set, the promenade set, is gorgeous. Why not use every part of it that you can without having to?
Yes, that little scene between Quark and Odo. Quark is saying that he's not shutting down for any Bajoran hearing, and Odo tries to persuade him. Well, Lieutenant Dax would be very pleased if you were to do this for her. And you can see Quark kind of weighing up whether his libido or capital comes first. And he finally says, "Business is business."
Business is business.
Which Odo then turns on him, saying that he's looking at the building regulations, and actually the Bajorans have introduced some new ones, and I'm not sure this bar is far enough away from the exit. You know, if you're going to change things, you're going to have to close down. That wall's going to have to go, which means that the second floor holosuite's going to have to get moved down. And Quark's kind of, you can't do all of this. And Odo just says, business is business. He's not messing around. It's just such a neat little scene that shows so much about those two characters, just to achieve the how did we get this into the bar, and probably to hoodwink us into not noticing that they didn't have a meeting room.
Yeah, I think that might be part of it, certainly. But it was also a golden opportunity for this fantastic pairing of Odo and Quark to just glance off each other in just such a wonderful way, as they always do. No, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's also a continuation of gleeful mischief, willful misuse of bureaucracy, bullying of people who can't really do anything about it. You know, it's everything we've already come to really enjoy in this episode. So it's delicious, delicious. Another course of that, please, waiter. I loved that. Followed up by Odo leaves the bar, and Sisko steps out turbolift to meet him, and is obviously now following up a new line of inquiry, which is, let's go to the source of this. If this extradition treaty has come from Klystron for this crime that's only just been revealed, I want somebody on the ground on Klystron to work out what the hell's going on. And weirdly, Odo, I found quite odd, kind of rebuffs Sisko's advance. Sisko's like, I feel like we should know more about this. And Odo's like, mate, you've got 30 minutes and this treaty will have to be granted. I can't see any way out of it. It's clear cut. So it turned the previous two scenes on its head a bit, I thought.
Yeah, I think Odo is a bit. I think he's more skeptical than deliberately trying to put barriers in Sisko's. Because Odo is, as they're walking, Odo says that Quark has just kindly donated his facilities.
Yes, absolutely. Love it.
And it's a nice little bit. It feels like a scene that Garag should have been involved in. It's a nice little bit of both of them saying what it is that they want without quite talking about the legality of it, which when he's the security officer. And I think we've mentioned before how Odo is quite fluid in his application of the law. I'm sorry, I'm full of them tonight. In his application of the law, sometimes he is extremely law bound. Even when he was under the Cardassians, didn't necessarily agree with Cardassian rule. He upheld their laws. In this episode, he's far more willing to bend things his way a little bit, hint at Bajoran building regulations that probably don't actually exist. So I don't think it's an unwillingness on his part to get involved, but he does advise that there are 30 years of dust covering the evidence. The hearing's only going to take about 30 minutes. And Sisko kind of hintingly says, I'm hoping to make the hearing a little longer than that. And Odo just says, good luck. It does feel nicely conspiratorial, but it doesn't feel as if Odo is very optimistic about it, even though he does agree to go and look for that evidence.
He does, which is wonderful and ultimately the key to the whole thing. But it was interesting to have that setback in their way, and I think you're right. I think that does come from Odo's just assessment of it, which is I'm putting my notes that he must see it as cut and dried. You know, there's simply nothing to be argued with. You know, and also there's this assumption that the extradition will go ahead, and therefore Dax will be taken back to Claytron and, without question, found guilty.
Yeah, and having Odo express that point of view ups the tension.
Yes.
Because we might assume that Sisko's obviously going to get what he wants. He's Benjamin Sisko. How is it going to go any differently? So to have a character who is on his side tell him, I don't think it's going to happen.
This is going to work, yeah.
At that point it brings us into a sense of doubt.
Yes. It does ratchet up the tension a bit. You're like, oh, Odo's the legal expert, for want of anything else. So if he doesn't think there's a hope, how are they going to get out of this one? You mean they're going to, but how? How are they going to get out of it? The odds seem stacked against them. So you're absolutely right. That was good.
And the next scene introduces the Bajoran arbiter, whose name is apparently Renora. I don't think it's spoken in the episode.
I think it is. Thank you for looking that up.
I looked her up because I really like her, much like the administrator in the last episode who was cataloguing all of the artifacts. Yes. She's really made her a character. And the arbiter is just pissed off throughout. She doesn't want to be here. And she expresses that she doesn't want to be here. I think the first thing that she says, I wrote it down, I am 100 years old. I do not have time to squander listening to superfluous language. In short, I intend to be here till supper, not senility. Understood?
I also noted that line. I loved it.
It throws Sisko's intentions into a cocked hat right from the beginning.
And that's it as well.
We're going to make this short and sweet, okay?
Oh God, I need long and waffly to kind of pull a rabbit out of the hat. But brilliant! What a great intro, and what a great character. Again, Deep Space Nine has given an extra, essentially, a walk-on extra, just a golden role, and found the exact right person to absolutely lock it in. Thoroughly enjoyed the Arbiter.
In terms of the set at this point, we're in Quark's bar, we're against that wonderful golden red backdrop. And she has a gavel, and it's not just a standard Earth gavel, because she's not from Earth. I think she's Bajoran.
Yes, she's Bajoran.
So she's got instead this weird egg-looking sphere thing that she bangs on the table forcefully whenever she wants attention, and then sets it back in its neat little cradle when she's not using it. It's just really sweet, and it needn't have been done. They could just have got a standard hammer, but they didn't. They thought of doing something different, and it looks really nice.
I absolutely loved it as well. I will draw classic Trek fans' attention to, I think, Star Trek 4, Undiscovered Country, when two characters are on trial in a Klingon court, and the Klingon judge has a similar gavel. It's just a ball.
Oh, nice!
So I think there is an intentional connection there. The only difference between the Klingon ball, when you smack it, actually has sparks come off it, and, it's all very Klingon, overly dramatic. But I don't think that was a coincidence that both alien cultures would have a round sphere as a gavel. Pow, pow, pow.
Oh, fab. Thanks for that, Tim.
Not at all. Not at all. That just popped into my head there.
The next thing I note is that after the not a trial, a hearing has begun, Ilon Tandro refers to Dax at least once, the accused Trill, as it, which to me...
Wow.
I think he might only do it the once, but he refers to the Trill as it rather than as he or she, possibly because he's referring to this creature that has moved between genders. And in the 90s, there wasn't a widely held mainstream agreement that they was going to be the non-binary pronoun. So it may just be that the writers landed on it to avoid gendering Dax. But it does, to me, because I've watched TNG very recently, it brought up that very famous trial episode, The Measure of a Man, where the entire drive of that trial is to determine whether Data has personhood. So to have another, he's not a prosecutor, he's just wanting to extradite Dax, but he is depersonalizing her right from the get-go.
100%. 100%. I think that's probably not a coincidence that they would continue that theme from another very successful courtroom Trek episode of depersonalization. I also wonder if it helps Ilon, avoid the fact that perhaps deep down he does feel he's punishing a young woman who was never involved in this crime for something. I don't know. I'm reading very far beyond the episode now.
I think my feeling about Ilon throughout is that he's made extremely unsympathetic.
Agreed. Agreed.
Because he is the son of the murdered general.
He is, yes.
We could have seen an episode where we felt, actually, this guy's got a really good point. His father was murdered. He's seeking justice here. We might like the character who's done it, but she may have committed a murder in a previous life. But there isn't really any hint of that. Ilon is always in a state of anger and officiousness. He's not likable. He's unsympathetic right from the beginning.
It's true.
And I think, it's just interesting that they chose to shape it that way, to make it unambiguously, no, we've got to save Dax, rather than maybe she should be brought to justice.
I think you're right, actually. That's interesting that they have painted Alon with very broad strokes, actually, right? And I hadn't realised, but he is a very unlikable protagonist.
He is.
Antagonist, sorry, in this instance.
Yeah, and he needn't have been. So it's an interesting choice on the part of the writers too. They've just very heavily stacked. Everything is very much Jadzia. We like her, and she is innocent. And we don't like him. He's bad, and he has to be stopped.
Yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right. And I'm going to now suddenly realise what I've been tickling the back of my brain, which is the writer of this episode was Dorothy Catherine Fontana, who started out writing episodes for the original series in the 1960s. Wow. And she wrote a little bit on TNG, and she did an episode of Deep Space Nine, this episode. So it's coming from a very established Trek writer. And I remember seeing her name pop up in the intro credits and thinking, oh, DC Fontana. She did several episodes. She also wrote some books as well for Trek. So, you know, this is a very accomplished Star Trek writer. I just wanted to note that she was the writer, and she died very recently, 2019. So a very long life and a very renowned part of Star Trek history. So recognition to DC Fontana there.
Yeah, thank you very much for looking her up, Tim. I think given how much we focus on the written scripts of these episodes, we should give nods to the writers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would normally, and I should have noticed it earlier, but it only then popped into my head, remembering that she was in the intro credits. So a lovely bit of legacy there. Let's leave Ilon behind and move to another great Star Trek traditional image, which is the crew in the captain's ready room, or Sisko's office, where Sisko has Bashir and Kira, and he's looking for any means to fight this case. And for me, the standout line was when he said to Bashir, you know, find me evidence that supports the theory that Trill hosts are separate and aren't responsible for one another. And Bashir says, well, I'm not sure there is any evidence. And Bashir says, assume there is and find it. And it's like, that was like, oh, that is such a Star Trek captain thing, which is, here is the solution, go out and get it. And it's like lots of people going, well, I don't know if we can. And
we want it, therefore it's possible, just do it.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you can imagine Picard saying something very similar, or even Kirk, you know, any Star Trek captain would be that way, you know. Here's my solution. Find it.
I was also really struck at this point that it's an extradition hearing. Presumably, although it's not the point of it, if they could demonstrate that Kurz and Dax were innocent, then presumably they could stop the trial before it began. 100%. He doesn't take that tack. Sisko pins all of his hopes on, we're going to prove they're two different people so that Dax can't be taken away, even if Curzon committed the murder. Which is, I liked that. I like the tension that brings to the episode, that Sisko genuinely doesn't know whether the murder was committed by Curzon, and that's what he's doing. He's just going to ignore whether Dax is actually innocent and just say Jadzia Dax is innocent because she's a different person.
You see, that's interesting, because I bumped on it immediately. I'm like, why aren't they trying to solve the mystery of the murder? Why are they fighting this here now? And I suppose you could argue that, they're just trying to stop the extradition rather than solve the whole crime. But it did throw me a bit, and obviously the intention is so that it can set up the later revelations in this episode. But I think
it is also because Sisko genuinely doesn't know. Yeah, although he's told Odo, right, and I think he told Ilon, he doesn't believe that Dax has done it.
No.
He doesn't have any evidence of that. He doesn't fully trust that they can prove that, whereas they might be able to prove that Dax is now a different Dax.
I think you're absolutely right. I'd never thought of it like that. And that's why, Kat, we appreciate your unique interpretation of this.
You waffle. And at this point, I wrote down something that I thought was interesting at the time. I apologise if it isn't. So I've written down that Sisko is in some ways the central character of this episode, that Dax doesn't speak much during it, and Sisko is the driving force behind her defence.
True.
And it's his beliefs, his morality, which are guiding his team in their actions, and which are probably most likely to carry the viewer with them.
Yes.
That we're sympathetic to him, because, like him, we don't know what Dax has done or not done. So yeah, it's a very Cisco heavy episode and a very. Although I think Cisco doesn't, there are a few occasions here when Cisco expresses his emotions, but not often. But just the narrative is driven by his decisions and his determination to argue in that direction, rather than by anything Dax does.
I think you're right. Actually, I'd never considered it like that, but it is very much so. And I think part of that falls on the fact that every courtroom drama we've seen so far on Star Trek ultimately seems to revolve around the commanding officer as kind of like the highest legal authority. So it's always been Picard in a seat, which is helpful because obviously Jean-Luc Picard and Patrick Stewart are wonderful orators, and you want to listen to them and you believe them when they speak. So I do think that's part of it. And also I think the writers were trying to push us in this direction of, it's a Dax episode, but let's also build this backstory they have with Benjamin. So let's build both of them up, A bit more on Curzon, which helps us develop a bit more knowledge about Ben Sisko, and also helps us learn some more about this new character, Jadzia. So I can see why it's split between them all and focused a bit more on. I suppose, yeah, you would. It's difficult with what they call an ensemble cast, isn't it? Where you've got all of these characters, and it's like, who's the leader?
Yeah, and how do you shine a spotlight on each character? And how do you give all of the cast of working actors their thrift in every episode?
This is going to be.
We've got O'Brien mentioned at the beginning, even though he's not bloody in it.
He's not even in it. But it is interesting, and Deep Space Nine will struggle with this more than any other Star Trek show because of the vast, huge array of supporting characters we are going to meet.
And how different and interesting they are.
Oh my God. Again, no spoilers, chat, but yes, I cannot wait for Kat to meet some more characters, not least Garak's arcs throughout the show. But again, no spoilers. Let's push us along.
Yes, Cisco has just instructed Bashir to find the evidence, assume the evidence is there and find it.
I love that, yes.
Cisco instructs Kira to find any precedents, and Kira clarifies, is a Trill responsible for the conduct, for the acts of its antecedent selves? What if I find the answer is yes? And Cisco says, then that answer is wrong. From this minute on, our answer is no. But if you do find a wrong answer, I want to see it. I can't fight what I don't know about. So he's really set the moral tone for the line they are going to tread, which is that Dax is a different person now.
Yes.
And cannot be held responsible for anything Curzon Dax did, whatever that may or may not have been.
Yep, absolutely. I loved that scene. I loved the fire in Sisko's voice when he was like, from this minute on, our answer is no. I love that line. And then you can see him, like, his logic takes over and he's like, but if the answer is no, then I need to know. And there is a man who's struggling with multiple responsibilities. His responsibility to his crew versus he's a Starfleet officer. He has a responsibility to law, to diplomacy, to intergalactic process, So
it's as well there's nothing else happening in the background while this extradition hearing's going on. He would have had a whole day of work to do while all of this was happening, but happily all of it can wait.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I do love the hybrid working system that Starfleet officers have, where they're like, no, forget running a ship, a station, negotiating with
Bajor. One
Bajor.
scene where he deputizes to someone else, just, Ensign, what's your face? You're in charge today. I'm dealing with this, but no, the station itself is fine.
Yeah, I've always wondered about this because this is something that Star Trek across all of the series is so guilty of. Whenever the captain walks off the bridge and they're like, Mr. X, you have the con, and it's like, what? I'm in charge of the whole ship. What? Whoa! But no, he's off to have his own adventure now, and I would love to do that. Just be like, nah, push everything off on whoever's at the front of the bridge. Usually Data, isn't it?
I got minions, I'm going to use them.
Exactly.
Stuff. I'm off to have an adventure.
Such freedom in the 24th century to just nip off and have fun.
But yes, let's have a look. At this point, a subspace communication arrives from Odo. So Bashir and Kira leave, and Sisko takes the call. Odo says that whoever did kill General Tandro, it made his troops so mad that they went out and won their civil war. So the murder was the instigating incident that caused the war to be won by his side, and which made the general a national hero. And Odo says that there are statues of him everywhere on Claystron 4. He's also found out that everyone old enough to remember says that the general and Curzon Dax were the closest of friends. They were comrades, inseparable. And Odo says that if the charges of treason and murder of his own best friend are true, then Odo would want to hang Curzon Dax up by his heels himself. But he reassures Cisco, don't worry, I'll do my job. But again, Odo's role in this is to present the bad news and to up the tension.
He
to tell us,
absolutely is.
all the evidence points to Dax. It's not looking good here, Captain. I'm like, Commander, I'll keep trying, but oh, it's bad.
It is bad. And what does he say? You'll hear from me. And it was just such a brusque sign-off. I love it. You'll hear from me.
I love how the different relationships with Cisco are really respected in this episode. Kira in this episode is quite buddy-buddy with him because he's being very deferring to the Bajoran authorities,
yes,
which is her weakness. Odo is very much, I'll see what I can do. I don't necessarily like it.
Which is very characteristically Odo as well. I think it's very establishing of his character.
And whenever Dax speaks with him, we've got that usual, she's the only person who calls him Benjamin rather than Commander because she remembers being much older than him. And she very much has that air of an older person in a younger body.
Wonderful?
She's very solemn. Yes.
Yeah, you can tell when she switches from the Dax, so the Jadzia kind of personality, and we're going to struggle with this. How do you define hosts? But the Jadzia personality is obviously very warm, gregarious, outgoing, playful. And
she is, but also very studious, very serious, very focused in a way that Curzon Dax perhaps wasn't.
100% wasn't, and we will find that out as we go along. But yes, I love the way that Terry Farrell projects that Curzon attitude. And sometimes there's almost a melding where you can see that it's Jadzia remembering something Curzon did, and there's a kind of wistfulness of like, I have this memory and I treasure this memory, and it's strange because I personally didn't have it, but I know it, and it's just it's wonderful. What a performance! I love how Terry Farrell projects Dax. It's great. I've lost my notes.
In the next scene, Odo meets with the General's widow, Inina Tandro. And my first thought upon seeing her is that she's played by the actress who played Fionnuala. She's played by Fionnuala Flanagan, who played Dr. Soong's wife.
Yes.
It was shot in the same year, the TNG episode. Yes. Where she turns up and she is effectively Data's mother, is the relationship that they have.
Exactly.
So a very different character, but also very well played by the same actress.
I thought she was brilliant, but I do think that Star Trek occasionally asks us to suspend a lot of disbelief. Where they're like, "Look, we put some stuff on the side of her head. She's a different person now," and I'm like, "That's quite blatantly the same actress. Don't try and fool me, Star Trek." With your a little bit of prosthetics makes a different person. Nonsense. So.
Not even in the same family. We can forgive Denise Crosby coming back on 3 separate occasions to play different versions of Tasha Yar or her daughter.
Okay.
But yeah, this is just 2 completely unrelated people appearing in different series in the same year.
Yeah. I love this scene. Actually, I thought Fionnuala Flanagan was brilliant. She in a very short period of time projected a very complex character, which I really enjoyed. And she was evasive and defensive, and you could tell she was keeping something from Odo, but she was also very proud and independent, and had clearly kind of gone through this kind of thing before. She was very deft with Odo, kind of fencing with him. But it's at the end when I believe Odo reveals that, no, it's not Curzon anymore. It's Jadzia. Curzon passed away 2 years ago.
Yes.
And there was that visible, very visible impact on Anina's face. And you're like, I've got to admit, that kind of very telegraphed to me immediately what was happening.
It was a very powerfully acted moment, because all the character says is, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." But while the actress, she raises a hand, trembling to her mouth, and looks very moved by this.
Yes, I got that. And unfortunately, because it was so well acted, it immediately telegraphed what was going on.
How close she was to Curzon,
Precisely.
Yes. But yes, that's a wonderful short scene. I really appreciate her character being brought in at that point, because they could have saved her up for a big reveal at the end, but instead they sensibly introduced her here and had Odo talk with her. We then go back to the extradition hearing. Nylon Tandra is called a Trill as his witness, Minister Selin Piers. And I like that the Trill government is referred to as the Trillion government.
Yeah, and I don't know if they ever do this again. It bumped on me because I never ever recall them referring to them as the Trillion. Because
I only noticed the word because it's the name of a character from Hitchhiker's
Hitchhiker's
Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, I did exactly the
So I'm
same.
sorry that's not upheld throughout, if it isn't.
I think it's not. I think at some point somebody else would have come along and gone, yeah, Trillion to sci-fi fans is very recognisable. So let's
Don't do it
not. I think
again.
it's like it's the Trill government, and then there's like organisations within the government that are just not all referred to as Trillion. So which is a shame. Would be nice to hear that more often. But there you go.
But yes, in this scene,
Mm,
Ion is kind of, he's not grilling, but he's getting information from
yes.
this Trill, who is there as an expert on Trills. He doesn't know Jadzia or anyone else who's involved. He's just there to talk about what it is to be a Trill. So we learn that
Mm,
his own Trill self has lived through the adult lifetimes of 7 hosts.
yeah.
He remembers his first host. He said it was a woman, as a matter of fact. And I like how little that is sensationalized here, as in previous episodes. There isn't a, my God, you underwent a gender change. How is that for you? What about your sexuality? How does that? No one's doing that. People are very calm. But, oh, okay, you used to be a man. Fine, you used to be a woman. Yeah, I just enjoy that. I like that they've got other more important things to focus on. It's just an accepted part of life as a Trill.
You
And
really, please.
now I was just going to carry on the scene and just say that Ilon asks, so if a crime were committed, the next host would remember it and would remember the details of it and still feel the guilt of it, all of which Selin Pierce agrees with. Sisko then cross-examines him and emphasizes this isn't a trial and Tandra isn't the prosecutor. And it's at this point that Tandra introduces the idea of the perfect Trill crime that he says Sisko is trying to endorse, the idea that if a Trill wants to get away with a crime, all they have to do is run for long enough to outlast their current host body, and voila, as soon as they're in a new host, they've got away with it because they can no longer be tried, which is, yeah, it's a compelling counter-argument.
I thought so as well. You know, who would ever think of having to legislate for the defendant died, but we can still prosecute? I mean, it would just never enter into anybody else's kind of legal framework. So I do like that they raised that, because it does throw a really interesting stick into the spokes of this episode.
I suspect that this episode was probably born of the writer sitting down thinking, right, what interesting things about Trills can we do an episode about? And an unsolved crime which suddenly comes to light and of which a Trill is accused is, it's a really nice way of having to have that fantastic philosophical quandary kind of episode that Star Trek likes to do.
And does so well.
And does very well, as well as digging into giving us more knowledge about what it is to be a Trill.
Yeah, I like that it was very world building for the Trill. Very helpful. I like that when DS9 does that. Got to be honest, I didn't enjoy Minister Pierce's performance.
I think it's a bit nothingy. It didn't strike me as being very interesting in any way, I guess.
No, I don't know if it was intentional that he should be played as so kind of wooden. But he's. I think
the character. Yeah, I think I just read the character as being neutral.
Yeah,
he doesn't know anyone involved. He has no. It's meant to be clear that he has no stake. He has no horse in this race.
I totally get that, but honestly, it came across to me as just the guy is just like absolutely wooden.
First day acting.
Yeah. I've been ignoring chat all evening. I am sorry, and I will acknowledge that Nigel, reasonably enough, observes that if you have to wait like 30 years on the death of a host to get out of a crime, perhaps it's not worth it. But I can see that. But some people will go to crazier lengths for crime. So.
And there's a lot of galaxy to run around in now. You can evade the law for a long time, potentially.
Exactly. I mean, this is it. You know, this is the whole point of this, is perhaps Curzon knew by the time the files were released. So I think earlier in the episode, the arbitrator says, why are you prosecuting after 30 years? And Elon Tandro says, well, the information that led to this crime was in sealed military files, didn't get it for 30 years. So perhaps Curzon was like, I know I'll be in a new host by then. It's not my problem.
But I quite like those as a justification, because that's a very real world that happens in our world
of course
too.
It does.
Some information about the current government is not disclosed until a certain length of time has elapsed. So it felt like a realistic reason for it to have been delayed so long.
And a realistic reason why people would rely on that to defend themselves. You know, I'm sure there are plenty of politicians who are like, 30 years, that's not going to be my problem. You know, and it's very cynical, but...
It does allow them to get away with things that, Given the age of a lot of our politicians as well, a lot of them will have passed on by the time their crimes come to light.
So you could say DS9 quite a cynical show, and you'd probably be right. But let's see what you think after a little bit of time. Yes, I made a few notes as well during Minister Pearce's conversation, which is it's interesting to learn about how trill personalities merge. There isn't any subsumption. It is simply that the symbiont integrates with the new personality, brings in the memories, and then you have a person who is Jadzia, host of Dax, and you're basically talking to, I suppose, one person, but it's realistically two. The Dax host, Dax symbiont, Jadzia host, and it's like it is.
I really like the way that they portray the trills, because I think it would have been very easy to have had a very straightforward, this is two people inhabiting one body. You could have had scenes where they have conversations between themselves.
Yes.
And it could have ended up being a very unfortunate analogy for dissociative identity disorder, which is a very serious mental illness. I think it could have been done far more clumsily than it is, and I really like the way that they insist it's an absolute blending. The two personalities can no longer be distinct from each other. And it feels very elegant. It bypasses a lot of the difficulties that having two minds in one body would bring about. And it raises all these interesting questions about, is there a dominant mind? Are both minds present separately? Are they really indivisible? What is it to have them, as you said, to have the memories of someone that you were not there for?
Yeah.
And I enjoy it a great deal. It feels very elegant. It feels very nicely played by Terry Farrell.
Oh yeah.
And I really appreciate their writing the trill in the way that they have. It's something completely new. It isn't two people in one body. It's one completely new person composed of two who have merged.
Yeah, it is.
Which enables Cisco to argue that she's now a new person. She's not culpable for the crime. And at that point, Ilan Tandro starts to get quite exercised, and he counters that, but Dax has the memories of crimes committed by Curzon Dax, and Cisco then counters that, yes, precisely, the memories have passed to a completely new person, someone who didn't commit the crimes. And then Tandro starts shouting that it's absurd and Dax can't be permitted to get away with their crimes, and then the arbiter, looking very annoyed, calls for a 2-hour recess because they are getting riotous.
I love that. I love that. Yes.
Whenever she speaks up, she looks so annoyed because she only wanted to be there for a very short time, and they keep dragging out these damn philosophical arguments that she didn't want to hear.
I've got to admit, if I'd have been her and it's like, oh, Starfleet want you to come and arbitrate something on their station, I would have gone, if I know anything about court hearings on Starfleet stations and vessels.
Does it involve a non-human or non-Bajoran life form? In that case, sod it, I'm not doing it. No, too complicated.
Yeah, that, or you have to clear my calendar for the next 2 days because I am going to be busy debating the rights of beings we've never encountered before. Yeah, I can imagine any legal professional would have gone, oh God, not a Starfleet legal situation. They're the worst. But at least
the best if you really enjoy legal wrangling.
Because you're like, oh wow, I'm gonna become a precedent. I am gonna become the precedent.
That's just it. If you want to enter into law, then doing all of this backwater, weird frontier, thank you, Bashir, nonsense. That's where it's at.
You're absolutely wrong. Did you say backwater?
I think that was a term that Bashir used in one of the
you're quoting
episodes when describing Bajor.
Yes, you're not describing Bajor, Kira's home, as a backwater. I certainly hope.
I wouldn't dare. She'd hunt me down.
And we're not kidding. She would.
So in the next scene, I think they've come back from
the recess.
From their recess, and the arbiter says, "Well, what she wants to do is to send the symbiont for trial and keep the host here on DS9. So Jadzia will remain here while the symbiont is tried." And Bashir, who's now on the witness stand, says that this cannot be done. It's a bit more complicated than that. And the arbiter responds, "Oh, what a surprise!"
Brilliant. One line, perfect delivery. Perfect summation of the character, the episode, the entire concept. Love it. Golden moment.
And Bashir goes on under questioning from Cisco, I think, to say that the symbiont and host are biologically interdependent once they've been joined. Neither can survive without the other.
Very important.
So Cisco then asks if Jadzia and Curzon are the same person, and Bashir says that aside from the gender change, there's marked differences in blood type, metabolism, nervous system, and most relevantly, the brainwave analyses are completely different. The brainwaves recorded when Curzon Dax existed are different from the brainwaves of Jadzia Dax.
Absolutely. And you'd think that would be enough, because we know brainwaves are kind of like your passport in Star Trek. You know, they
it's
are
like the fingerprint of your brain. Yeah,
fingerprint of the brain. That's some excellent, metaphor summary in Star Trek. You're talking like it's a fingerprint of the brain. Yes, indeed, Doctor.
In many ways, Data has fingerprints. Just remember that.
Does he?
He does, yeah, in Measure of a Man. They say that, yes, just like you, his hair grows, his skin ages, and he has fingerprints.
Oh, my Lord. It's been a long time since I've seen it, much longer than I've seen a lot of TNG episodes. Thank you for that update. How interesting. The indoor cat there in the chat also pointing out that brain science is usually the bottom line of any Star Trek argument involving a definition of a person. Your unique brain signature, your brainwave pattern is usually the get out of jail card, but not this time.
Just don't tell Descartes.
Listen, we're covering enough philosophy tonight. I'm there are lines. Cat, please, there are lines.
But next, Tandro then asks Bashir how the symbiont brain works, and Bashir explains that the two brains are like two computers that are linked together. So Tandro asks if the brainwave patterns of each brain could be analysed separately. And Bashir tries to duck the question. He really doesn't want to answer it. And he eventually has to say that, yes, you could separate out the brainwave patterns. But he refuses to guess whether the patterns of the symbiont's brainwaves have changed since Curzon Dax was alive. However, he has to concede that there's no clear evidence of the symbiont brain having changed in any way since the last host. So Tandro is going for it. He really wants to convict Dax, and he is quite persuasive in his lines of questioning, such that Bashir, as much as he obviously really wants to get Dax off the hook. And to be fair, although I've been very harsh about Bashir, and rightly bloody so at the start of this episode, at least he doesn't make any impassioned pleas about the fact that he's in love with her.
I've got to admit.
Again, we could have had an episode where he'd got on the stand and said, I didn't even know Curzon Dax. I don't fancy him. I might had I met him, but I don't. But I fancy Jadzia because look at her. She's 28 and she's fit and thing. But he doesn't. Happily, we're spared that.
Yes. Thankfully, Julian Bashir and Alexander Al-Fadl managed to rein in a lot of the knobheadery behaviour that he's displayed so far, and he is actually a consummate professional medic, which is, here are all the facts to support my argument, and then when, as you say, Elon's like, actually, I've already thought about this as well, what about the brainwaves of the symbiont? He's like, you've boxed me in, I can't get out of this. My professional scientific opinion, sadly, is the brainwaves are the same in the symbiont, so it is arguably the same person. So I thought, actually, for the brief period that Bashir has in this episode, right now he's excelling and sort of making up for the absolute bellendery at the beginning of it.
Yeah, he's reminding us that he actually is a highly qualified doctor.
This is it. And
his personality is terrible, but his knowledge is good.
And, we haven't seen too much evidence of him being a fantastic doctor, I think the last episode where he was just like, oh, Vash, you're in great health, which means I can't keep you here. And it's like, dude, threatening somebody with imprisonment is not the come on you think it is. But we'll gloss over that. It was not Bashir's episode. Let's put him to one side.
Happily. Yes. Oh, Cisco then calls himself as a witness, which, because it isn't a trial, he's permitted to do. I think that the arbiter looked a little weary, but permitted it.
Yeah. She's already realising what episode she's in.
Cisco repeats that Curzon Dax was not the ideal Trill. He says he drank a little too much and could be more interested in women than perhaps he should have been. And again, props to the episode for not questioning whether that's an aspect of Jadzia's personality. It could have got far more leery than it does. Happily, it does not. And he says this to express that Curzon was not at all like the young woman who's now in the courtroom, who is very, very, upstanding. And when he's asked to describe the nature of his relationship with Curzon Dax, Cisco says, he took a raw young ensign under his wing and taught me to appreciate life in ways I'd never thought about before. Whatever sense of honour I might have today, he nurtured. Which, again, is a lovely gesturing to and expansion on what we know of their relationship, how much Sisko owes to Dax, and how strange the change in hierarchy must be for both of them now.
Yeah.
That Dax retains the memory of having been far more knowledgeable, far older than Sisko, but Dax is now much younger and has to defer to him.
It is interesting.
And again, we could have had a very differently written Dax. We could have had someone who constantly pulled rank on him on the basis that she's technically 200 years old and has far more experience than Sisko can ever have.
Yep, absolutely.
So I do like the fact that in the writing of these episodes and these characters, it feels as if choices have been made and stuck with. It doesn't feel as if the writers have been penned in down a particular path. There are lots of different things they could have done, and they've made active decisions to do it the way that they're doing it, which means that we can criticize it if we don't like it.
100%. Oh, that's what we're here for. That's what this whole podcast is about.
Oh yeah.
I'm amazed we haven't done
something
more.
we love and tear it apart.
I'm sure there will come a time when we will hit an episode that one or both of us loathe, and I speed the day when we can finally slam it for all it's worth. But I did love that scene, and I loved that line. Whatever sense of honor I have today, he nurtured. And it's great because I think Star Trek's talked about mentorship a lot to this point, but it hasn't really explored it much. You could say that, Picard has mentored Data and humanity a lot, but it always felt like, and here is the lesson today, Mr. Data. And Data goes away.
And Data tends to learn from everybody. He spends a lot of time with Geordi as well.
Of course he does.
We haven't seen many straightforward, apart from the actual father-son relationships.
Yes.
There haven't been very many long-term mentor, because people tend to sit within their different disciplines. They're equal to each other, which is part of Gene Roddenberry's vision.
Yes.
Am I right in thinking? Sorry, I was going to ask. I think at this point, Gene Roddenberry had died by the time Deep Space Nine was conceived of, or was he? Okay.
In the early stages of conception of a spin-off show, he was still with us, but he was very ill at that time. I've just been reading one of the background books, and I know he was not well. And by the time the network were willing to commission a new Star Trek show, because they wanted a new sci-fi show, and they'd approached, I think, Rick Berman, who was one of the producers on TNG, and said, we want a new sci-fi show. And he and Michael Piller were like, could we do a new Star Trek show? And they were like,
we've just seen this amazing guidebook for Babylon 5.
Listen, we're not getting into that. We're not getting into that. It remains sealed in the military archives for 30 years, so perhaps sometime this year we shall find out who came first. But the creators of Deep Space Nine, they were still very much under the wing of Gene, but it was sadly not long for Gene, and he definitely did depart before Deep Space Nine went into the actual commissioning stage. So
which might account for some of the differing themes, some of the exploration
100%.
Of hierarchy, which is far more present in Deep Space Nine than it was in TNG.
Tension between the crew, which was something I know Gene always argued strongly against. He was like, no, the crew of a Federation starship will have eclipsed all of that kind of tension between colleagues. We are working together, a utopian society, which is great, sounds wonderful, great thing to work towards. Not great for producing drama in a TV show. Where
they did remarkably well with TNG, which ran for so many series with minimal drama between the crew.
Remarkable, right?
Yes.
And it is held up by many to be the banner of Star Trek. It will always probably be the benchmark. I think TNG will always be the show we measure every single successor show against.
Yeah, it's well established enough, and very much both building on the old thing. It's become its own thing. And it was very long running. Yeah, I can imagine.
Very popular, very esteemed. I think it ended up eclipsing the original series in terms of just viewership and love. I think the successor shows have not ever come close to its kind of peak viewership. So it's always going to be that benchmark. But in some ways, I do think, and we will discover this as we go along, that the writers and the creators were always like, can we get away from that vision a bit? And it will be up to you, a veteran TNG viewer, Kat, to tell us if you think they did, and if they did a good job or not. But we are away from what I just want to say that I love it. I love every time Ben Sisko talks about being mentored by Curzon, because more than anything, I love the idea that a close, touching, platonic male relationship is a thing that exists in the future. Because I don't think TV drama does that very well. It didn't in the 90s. And I just love the idea that Cisco, whenever he gets the chance, will say, "I was guided by this man." He shaped me, he made me into a better officer, a better person, and it was just lovely. I really enjoyed it. And I'm done. I've waffled for a long time. Kat, please take me away.
Oh, that is lovely. You're right, and yeah, I think you're right that in Star Trek, even they are friendly. They're friends, but yeah, there aren't very many close male friendships explored, apart perhaps from Geordi and Data. And Data's an android learning how to be a human. It's a little bit different.
It is. I'm glad you observed that. Yeah.
But yes, Cisco has said that any honor he has, he attributes to Curzon Dax, and Tandro says that as an honorable man, surely Cisco doesn't want the crime to go unpunished, and Cisco agrees that he'd rather no crime ever went unpunished. So Tandro asks then if Cisco would want the symbiont Dax to be punished for a crime he committed. Sindra asks how Tandro is so sure that it's the symbiont part of Curzon Dax which was the criminal influence. What if it was Curzon, the host, who was responsible? And Tandro says, well, no. Under the rules you've just outlined, they'd both be guilty. The personalities once joined function as one. When you put salt into water, the two become indistinguishable and inseparable. Sorry, I'm just repeating what happened in the episode now, but it's a very talky episode.
Yeah.
And Cisco counters that you've just made my point for me. When water is boiled off, the salt returns to its original state. If you pour that same salt into another liquid, it becomes something completely different, and Jadzia Dax is a completely new entity.
That's it.
And at that point, the aggrieved arbiter calls for another 1 hour recess.
Or throw a chair at them. That's enough waffle out of you.
I like that they gave her that frustration, though, because otherwise it would have felt very strange, and it is very plot necessary. It's about the nuts and bolts of making the plot progress, that we've got court scene outside where Cisco can talk to Odo and get more evidence. Court scene, Cisco talks to someone else. Court scene. So having that kind of covered up with a little bit of, I'm annoyed that we have to do this, but we're going to take another recess. Hopefully I'll get home before I die.
You're absolutely right. I'd not thought of that, but that is a wonderful antidote to what is otherwise a very formulaic and dry sequence of people arguing with each other, which I think has been difficult before, and it's been excelled with, say, like Riker taking Data's arm off and Bruce Maddox just being a creep. So there are ways around it, and in this episode it is very much the wonderful, wonderful arbitrator?
Just arbiter.
Arbiter, thank you. Right, excellent.
She arbitrates as an arbiter.
Thank you. There we go. That's the language I needed.
But yes, during this recession, Odo has a recess, rather. Odo calls again, and Odo's found a communication log from Clystron 4, which he believes is incriminating. It shows a number of communications between Curzon Dax and General Tandro's home. And Cisco says, well, the two were close friends. It's natural that they should have communicated. And Odo responds that a number of the communications took place while the General was away at the front. And Cisco just says, the wife. And Odo repeats, the wife.
Yeah, I love that line. It's such a it's such like almost like a gumshoe detective, trope cliche, isn't it? The wife, I should have known it was the dame.
Investigating a murder, we didn't look at the wife. That was terrible. But yeah, Odo says that maybe it was innocent. Maybe he was providing a little emotional support during tough times. Or maybe it was something more. Perhaps they were having an affair, and that would translate into a solid motive for murder.
Murder most foul.
Murder!
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Once again, Odo comes in, offers more evidence, and ramps the tension up.
I love it. I love it. He's only on screen a little bit, but every time he turns up, he's like a bird of omen doom. I'm only here to give you bad news.
Sadly, he doesn't have any shape-shifting to do in this episode. No. They didn't find a moment for him to surprise General Tandro with Obi.
For the first time.
He's the chair that she's sitting on.
He's not a wine bottle picture.
Oh, Dax, I miss you so much. All those times we kissed. No, sadly not.
I've got to admit, your recreation of Deep Space Nine, I'm intrigued. I wish to see more.
I'll do a one-person show as soon as we finish watching them all.
Great, so I'll check back with you in 8 years and see how you're doing. So I think this is then followed up. I think this is then cuts immediately to Odo going back to Anino Tandro, and
That's right. Yes.
what a scene! A brilliant performance by Julianne Traynor, I think, the actor.
This was Fionnuala Flanagan.
Oh yes, sorry, I'm thinking of her character in TNG. Sorry, you're absolutely right. Fionnuala what's the surname?
Flanagan, I think.
Flanagan. Thank you. Just has an amazing scene where like that mask of proprietary and the widow of the great hero Ardlan Tandro, and it falls, and just the venom and the vitriol, and he was not the hero in life, he was in death. I loved it. What a brilliant
It's a tour de
scene.
force. I'd be surprised if she hasn't done stage acting, because it's just a wonderful monologue of that turn from I've been the proud widow. I've had to attend banquets held in his name and never speak my own truth.
Never speak my own truth.
I don't think she actually says those words. What does she actually say? Oh no, sorry, I'm just speaking for her now. But
it's essentially that, isn't it?
Yeah, she's dedicated her life to serving the memory of my husband, never remarrying, representing him at banquets held in his name, and never to talk about the man he really was. It's lovely because she's playing a woman who's on screen for so little time, and she's got such a rich history of living with this man who it turns out, did not like very much.
No.
And expressing this to Odo, who is not the most sympathetic ear in the world.
No, I can imagine. All it does is probably reinforce Odo's, well-known and well-held contempt for relationships, love, and all the messy situations that you humanoids get involved in.
Nonetheless, Odo tries to persuade her to talk at the hearing for Dax's sake, and Inina says that actually, yes, at this point, the general's followers are not going to be swayed in their devotion at this point, and she looks slightly hopeful while she says that her own place in history might be changed, implying that there's a chance that she could step out from under his shadow at last after all these years.
And I liked that because it gave her an agency of her own. She wasn't just like, oh, I guess I'll turn up the secret and save, the member of the cast that you all know. There was actually something in it for her. She had a bit of an epiphany, possibly, spurned a bit by discovering that Curzon had passed on, who she clearly felt a lot for. But it felt like it wasn't just a tool to advance the plot. It felt like it was something separate that was happening to this character. And they were like, you know what? I have agency for myself. I am going to step out from this shadow of this hated man and actually, redeem it by owning myself, owning my own story. And I really liked that. I thought it gave agency, such a small scene, such a small character, but what it represented was so much more.
It's a really good point, because again, they could have written her as having been very downtrodden, having been very deferential, not having much of a mind of her own, because she'd always had to defer to her husband in life, and now she has to defer to his followers in death. But no, she's been written as, I'm going to use that cursed phrase, she's a strong female character. She actually has motivation of her own beyond her husband.
It is, and more than that two-dimensional strong female character. She's, because I know we use that to define any woman who punches a man in very tired 21st century telly. But she is somebody who didn't have agency initially and is now taking it for herself, on behalf of herself.
She talks herself around to her, although Odo is trying to press her to come to the trial. The hearing, not a trial.
There we go. Thank you, the cat, the indoor cat in the chat, reminding us it's a hearing, not a trial.
But yeah, you're right. She makes the decision for herself, and we see it happening on screen, and it's persuasive. It looks like it's real.
It does. I was totally taken in by the whole performance. Loved it. So, credit to Fionnuala Flanagan. Excellent performance. And then I think we throw back to another scene in Dax's quarters.
Yes, and Sisko's confronting Dax here. And at this point, Sisko is showing his frustration that he's been putting all this effort forth, and Jadzia is just sitting there not saying anything. And Sisko argues that Jadzia has been protecting Anina Tandro's reputation, which is why she won't defend herself by making the love affair public knowledge. But Curzon didn't hurt anybody and didn't commit treason. Dax hasn't committed any crimes. And Sisko says that what Dax is doing is effectively committing suicide for the sake of something that happened in another lifetime. He asks whether Ilan Tandro is Dax's son, and Dax says, "You've got an overactive imagination, Benjamin."
Can I say I bumped on that as well? And that did, when I first saw this, that did like slither into my mind.
It didn't occur to me. But it's a good point. The timelines would have matched up well enough. And it would have added an extra layer of Ilan's trying to prosecute this person, who it turns out could be his parent.
I've got to admit, it did bump on my mind, but
compelling.
They set up what is arguably a bit of a tired TV trope, and actually they shoot it down. Dax is like, no, that's not what's going on here, and you believe her because it's one of the first times that Jadzia becomes quite emotional. She's like, you have an overactive imagination. She shoots it down. You're under no misconceptions that Ilan is Jadzia, Curzon's son.
Yes, and then. An interesting moment from Sisko. He raises both fists for a moment in frustration, and then casts them down, steps away from Dax, and actually I think it's just off camera, but you hear him hit the wall.
I think on mine you do actually see it. I don't know if I have a wider screen or something, but he does. He hits the pillar holding up that lovely shelving unit we discussed earlier. He slams the flat of his palm against it, and you're like...
Which I found uncomfortable in that scene because he's standing there with a young woman. He raises his fists, expressing effectively, "I want to hit you right now." He walks away, hits the wall instead, and he says, "If you were still a man,"
there you go.
He says, "Damn it, if you were still a man," and then walks away and punches the wall. Which I think I felt a bit differently having thought about it. I felt quite.
Your initial impression is valid.
My initial frustration was, that's not okay. You cannot threaten someone with violence, however much they're frustrating you when you are the commander. Your relationship with her, she's a young woman, she works for you. Why are you expressing any kind of physical violence here? And it's shortly after that, within the same scene, that the two have relaxed a little and are talking about their memories of the past. And they talk about a time when Curzon punched Sisko to prevent him from doing something regrettable. Their old relationship was one whereby these two men would punch one another if they thought they were going to do something they didn't want.
Men would rather punch each other than go to therapy. I mean, come on. Come on, guys.
Which again, I think again it might be partly a facet of the time, but it's also expressing something about their relationship.
Yes,
they were close enough that I think the modern equivalent would probably be, we can tell one another harsh truths without punching one another.
Yes, we've come a long way.
Yeah. Back then it was, I'll punch you out if you're going to do something I don't like, mate, because that's how much I love you.
That's exactly how I read it as well. But I think you are right to bump on the initial impression, which is, here is a angry man in a circumstance where nobody else can intercede, raising his hand to a relatively defenseless woman. And that's not to disparage Terry Farrell or Jadzia Dax, who is, as you will find, more than capable of defending herself. It is just the immediacy of the situation is very uncomfortable. But I do think, a lot of that comes from 90s TV sitcom writing and an attempt to remind you that, these used to be two almost like younger and older brother, I think, is one of the impressions I get of Curzon and Ben's relationship.
Yeah, and I think another purpose it serves is to illustrate how frustrated Sisko is at this point.
Absolutely, I was going to come to separately.
From his point of view, he's been arguing for hours with this very annoyed arbiter who wanted it to be over very quickly. He's doing everything he can, and I think he says in this scene, doesn't phrase it this way, but he's got no more tricks to pull. There are no more questions he can ask. There's nothing else he can do.
Something like that, he says.
And she's just sitting there not saying anything, refusing to help herself. And she's the only one who knows what actually happened. I can understand his frustration. I empathise with it.
So can I. And I think Ben Sisko would not understand why somebody would not stand up and fight. He is clearly a man who's always stood up and fought from being a fresh young ensign and having to, punch a right alien who threw a drink in his face or get stopped by being punched by his best friend. And then
I think he says at some point in this scene that one thing that Curzon really imposed upon him was the need to protect the people under his care. And now Jadzia Dax is preventing him from doing that.
You do get his frustration, and you've got to remember as well, this is still the Ben Sisko is 4 years on from Wolf 359. He is still smarting from the loss. He wasn't able to protect his wife. He was barely able to protect his son. He lost his ship, his crew. Here is a man who has been wounded. He is going to be frustrated. He was about ready to haul off and punch Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the flagship of the fleet and, one of the most renowned Starfleet officers ever. Here is a man who is angry and is not afraid to express his frustration. And not that I'm saying there are good reasons, but you can understand the motivation under that characterization.
Absolutely. It's that, as you say, he's suffered so many losses, and incredible. This person, for all that she's different now, is his oldest friend and mentor. And he's watching her throw her life away. From his point of view, she's at risk of the death penalty, and isn't even expressing any kind of gratitude that he's trying for her.
Yeah, you can totally understand it, and you just got to finally accept that Ben Sisko is a flawed man, and that makes him a real man, a real character. You can believe this person because they're going to make mistakes and errors and act in a way that they wouldn't normally because they're frustrated and they act out. As uncomfortable as that makes us, I guess.
And I think the rest of that scene does a lot to help us sympathise with both characters.
I love this whole scene.
After Dax has mentioned the time when Curzon Dax knocked Sisko down with a right cross before he could kill the Argosian lieutenant who threw a drink in his face, Sisko points out a small scar on his face that beyond that side, that Curzon's ring made with that punch. And Dax looks very moved when she says that she tried on that ring after Curzon died. And it just slipped off my finger.
I felt that a great deal. I felt that was almost an insight into... Because we've seen the transition from... in the very first episode, we saw the symbiont be removed from Curzon and placed into Jadzia, and she had this euphoric look on her face of, I now see Dax. But it doesn't show the other side, which is... There must be some grief that goes with the symbiont. I've lost a host, a body I've occupied for a humanoid lifetime, memories that no longer will continue. So there must be some grief there in between hosts. I'd never thought of it. And that wonderful, very heartfelt performance from Terry Farrell, I thought was brilliant at conveying that. There's a lot of emotions in this scene, and I really, really enjoyed it. Because, Sisko goes as well from standing over her being, angry and frustrated, and he sits on the floor beside her, below her, and he's like, I'm trying to help, and she reaches out and takes his hand, and she's like, you are my dearest, bestest friend, and it's just wow. I loved it.
It's a really powerful scene. I love how it's acted. It's exactly what's needed at that point in the episode to bring us back to who the characters are, rather than just what legal jargon can we use to try and get around this. And they move on in that scene. Dax talks about the shame that she still feels at Curzon's indiscretion, i.e. his affair with Nina Tandro. And she says, when one of my...
perspectives on the previous host's behaviour. What a fascinating perspective that must be.
Yeah, there was one quote I particularly liked. When one of my kind stumbles, Benjamin, it is a mistake that's there forever. And she clarifies that Curzon Dax did love Inina, if that makes any difference at all. But the idea that she does hold that what Tandra has been saying is true. She does hold on to the guilt for what Curzon did. It isn't the crime necessarily at this point, the crime that she's being accused of, but she did. The word adultery isn't brought up, but Curzon Dax had an affair with another man's wife. He had an affair with a married person, and Dax feels the shame of that very acutely.
Which I think is, again, an excellent opportunity to distinguish between hosts, between symbiont, and again, it does leave the question: who made that decision? Was it Curzon or was it Dax? Who made the decision to fall into love and into bed with?
And we've emphasised that it has to be the both of them working in tandem.
I guess you're absolutely right. It is, and it will be interesting to see how you judge the development of Dax and Jadzia's personalities over the series kind of bear that out. How much they are the same and how much they are different. It will be interesting, certainly.
But as this scene ends, I just want to note that Dax, even now, won't tell Sisko whether or not she murdered, whether or not Curzon Dax, murdered General Tandro. Tandro.
They are keeping all of the actual integral parts of this hearing from us. So we are as in the dark as Sisko is, as everyone is. The only person who clearly knows is Dax and Enina Tandro. They are the only ones who clearly seem to know exactly what happened. And it's a great way of keeping the tension ratcheted up.
It is, but again, I feel the frustration that Sisko feels because the person who knows what happened is there and won't tell the people who are trying to help her. Pete's sake,
right?
Jadzia Dax, just say a thing and then they can deal with it. Oh, but yes, they. Sorry, Tim.
No, I'm just going to say if Dax could, if Jadzia could just say what happened, even if it was, you know what, I totally killed a guy. At least we'd known we could move forward. But you're absolutely right.
Oh, and in the chat, Izzy is asking, saying a person is the sum of their memories. The question is Dax sentient or just a memory bank? So does Dax still live now as an active component of Jadzia Dax, or are they just a repository of the memories of former lives?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Izzy. And I think that's something the episode has tried to define, but perhaps not done a great job because I still, to this day, I'm not 100% sure how independent Dax is from the host. I don't know.
They've got 45 minutes to sort out a lot of questions.
Absolutely. They've got 7 series. I still don't know if they truly got to an answer. You shall have to tell us if you thought they did when we get there, Kat.
I will in however many years' time.
Gloss over that
but for now, we go back to the hearing, and the poor 100-year-old arbiter says, Lieutenant Dax, you are either 200 years older than I am, or you're about the same age as my great-granddaughter. At first I wondered which of those you were. Now I am bothered by the likelihood that you may be both. Which is nice. It shows that she's been following along and she is invested. She has a personal response to the person in front of her and what it will mean for her, whatever she determines.
No, I think that represents her as a reasonable authority figure. She is a judge. And you get the feeling that she's very, independent. She's not going to be swayed by anything but the hard facts that lead her to a decision. And I thought that little speech.
And I guess,
go ahead.
Nuts and bolts plot-wise, I guess that's another reason to have Ilan Tandro as such a powerful force in that episode that he is absolutely against, because we've got the arbiter who is completely neutral and feels neutral. Her only agenda is to get away from here because she's fed up.
You're absolutely right.
So I like that portrayal of her as interested now, but not invested in any particular outcome. She just wants to note that she'll get it right. So Dax has now taken the stand. So we hear about Jadzia, the host, before she became a Trill.
Yes,
Before she became a Trill. Jadzia is she, Dax is arguably they. And we hear about Jadzia competing against other young people for the opportunity to become a host to a Trill. Apparently it's a very desirable position and there are various competitions that are held to try and determine who will get it. We learn that Jadzia, before she was joined with Dax, had acquired premier distinctions in exobiology, zoology, astrophysics, and exoarchaeology.
Thank you for listing them all. I was blown away. It's such a helpful and impressive reminder that, regardless of the fact that she's lived, 6 or 7 lives, Jadzia, the woman, unaugmented by, this worm in her belly with 7 lifetimes of memories, is a brilliant scientist. A brilliant scientist. I loved it. It was such a tiny little bit, but you're sort of like, oh, wow, Dax really knows her shit. Jadzia really knows her shit.
Yeah. She absolutely does. And I really loved that exoarchaeology is in there. I would love to have a scene between her and Picard having an argument about findings on
characters that should meet. Oh, right. Yeah, that would be absolutely brilliant. Characters that absolutely meet. But it is great. It is great. And also it helpfully sets her up as, she's clearly our Data, our Mr. Spock. She clearly has the knowledge of the kind of weird situations which we're going to be in, which are alien ruins, alien life forms, and quantum subspace filaments.
Which makes her ideal for the Deep Space Nine station, which is right next to Bajor on this wormhole that's got a load of profits in it. Yeah.
So it's a nice little bit of, establishing some credentials as well. I thoroughly enjoyed that bit as well.
And on the basis of that, Sisko argues that it would be wrong to try Jadzia, this very accomplished young woman, for a crime committed before she was even born. Which Ilan Tandra then counters by asking whether Jadzia, before joining with Dax, had agreed that upon becoming a Trill, she would assume all of the responsibilities that went with that, including the consequences that the actions of that Trill had previously committed might entail, and any criminal acts that they might have committed. And yes.
No hesitation.
The question actually is, like, I think that Jadzia would have had to say yes, but the question's left hanging because Inina arrives.
Just before that, though, I do want to touch on that a bit. I do feel like because they turn to Ilon and he sensibly says this will only take a minute. He clearly knows that Jadzia is going to say yes to his questions. He clearly knows that if he asks her, will you take responsibility for the actions of your previous host, she's going to unequivocally say yes.
Yes, that's a good point. He's nailed it down now. This is his winning moment.
Precisely. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that he should know that he should know the host of Curzon would come down so squarely in his corner, which I always thought that was a little bit odd. How did he know for sure that?
Yeah, he could infer it from her silence because she hasn't said anything in her own favour, only answered the questions that Sisko's asked. But yeah, I guess the question he's asking her was, did you agree to take responsibility? And she might say no, in which case she's saying, I never really wanted to join with the Trill. I didn't accept that responsibility. I guess there isn't an answer she could give that would.
That's a very good point.
Sound fair, apart from yes, I knew what I was getting myself into.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, interesting. But as you say,
yes, she doesn't get a chance to answer because at that point the doors burst open and Inina and I think
it's someone with a hood on. They must be plot specific.
Oh yeah, she walks in with a hood up and then takes it down. She announces who she is.
Dun dun dun.
And Ilon resists, going, "Mom, what are you doing?"
I've got to admit, I bumped on that as well. Yeah, and my notes are, "Mother, you're embarrassing me in front of Dad's killer." This is so surreal, right? This is so surreal.
It's such a bizarre scene.
It really is.
What the hell is Ilon doing?
But there it is. The revelation is that Inina Tandra says there was no way Curzon Dax could have committed the crime because she knew exactly where Curzon was when the transmission was sent, revealing the general's location. He was in bed.
She also has a lovely statement that she opens with, "This hearing is unnecessary. These accusations are erroneous." And Ilon actually asks, "Mother, what are you talking about?"
There it is. It's wonderful. All the power, all of the hinge of this episode is on her. It turns on her. The moment she arrives and delivers those lines, you know it's wrapped up. It's neat. It's sorted. I loved it. Again, she's given bare minutes to perform, and Fionnuala Flanagan delivers a knockout performance that turns the whole episode on its head.
And again, the direction is really nice in this scene. When she is speaking, you have Inina is front and centre in the frame. You've got her son standing behind one shoulder, off to one side, and you can see Jadzia over her other shoulder at the back. So you've got all three of the characters facing the Arbiter and all three of them emoting in relation to the different things that they're experiencing. It's lovely. It's just really nicely done. They could have had them sitting in different parts of the bar. You could have had cut shots of them with different reactions, but no, they're just there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you're absolutely right, and I never thought about it, but it is a wonderful through scene. You are the Arbiter, and you are learning this astonishing new development. You know, that's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, point of view with the camera in this episode is really strong.
It really is. I think I'd never realised it, but they've always put us in the Arbiter's chair. We are the ones that the episode is trying to convince of one thing or the other. God, that's brilliant, Kat. Good eye. Thank you.
But yes, I also like, as you say, she says that she knows where Curzon was. He was in my bed. And she could have gone for, We were good friends. We were having a conversation. We were out in the garden. She could have said anything. It's all got the same amount of evidence, but no, she goes straight for he was in a son's there, a son's standing just and she's like, I was sleeping with him.
We was banging. And it's just like, because who can dispute that? You know, the staidest judge in the world will be like, I mean, nobody would come out and admit that if it wasn't true, so I guess case closed.
I guess we can also put it down to 30 years of not bloody saying it. Just every day waking up going, oh, I had sex with Kurs and Dax, and never saying it to anyone. And now she's like, finally in public.
Yeah. And this is it. I think that's what this whole episode has been building towards. More than anything has been Anina Tandra going, I own my life. I am not in hock to that brutal old man who died 30 years ago. I am my own person. Freedom for Anina Tandro. That's what this whole thing has been building towards.
And just before that scene ends, Anina reaches up a hand to her son's shoulder because he's staring at her in horror and disbelief, and he jerks away from her. There's been a bond broken there.
Yeah.
The arbiter advises Tandra that he will want to re-examine his extradition request, and until then, the hearing is adjourned. Gavel.
Bang. And she walks out. she's
had enough.
Every other time she's walked up to the side. This time she walks out through the bar like, I ain't coming back. You suckers, you wasted enough of my time. Good night. Mic drop, gavel drop, out.
And I think that moment, more than anything else, unfortunately, although I've had a lot of nice things to say, again, a lot of things that I liked about this episode, I think that moment and the arbiters, finally I can fucking leave, it kind of encapsulates it for me, because she has wasted in her life so many hours on a philosophical inquiry into the nature of trills, the culpability of a trill for crimes committed when the symbiont was bound to a different host, and ultimately none of that conversation mattered because the crime wasn't committed by a trill. Instead of resolving any of those questions about the culpability of trills, the writers just say, our cousin didn't do it after all, he's off the hook. It's fine. So we've just spent 45 minutes arguing about whether or not Jadzia is guilty of a crime committed by Curzon, only for them to go, hypothetical, done away with, it's fine, actually. And I felt really aggrieved by that.
I've never thought of it like that, and you are absolutely right. It is almost a Deus Ex Machina, isn't it? It's...
Besides, it's resolved by something other than the questions that they've been pursuing throughout the episode. And in terms of kind of the meta, what's happening on screen matching what's off screen, that's what the episode was. This was Sisko trying to waste enough time until he had the evidence that he needed. And the form that evidence took was that Curzon didn't commit the crime, which Jadzia could have said right at the beginning. Or guess what? If Eilon had a conversation with his mum before leaving Clystron 4, said, hey, Mum, I'm going to go and try and prosecute that bastard who killed me dad. And she'd gone, oh, actually, son. The whole hearing wouldn't have had to take place. This whole episode happened because the relationship between the mother and her son was so bad that he literally didn't tell her that he'd found her husband's killer. What? And there's no evidence. They don't talk about the fact that they're estranged or they've never got along.
That's a good point,
He just doesn't mention it to her. So the arbiters just spent a whole freaking day. It's Eilon's fault. It's Anina's fault. And the whole thing was pointless. And the episode raised so many good questions, and it doesn't answer any of them. It gives evidence in favour. It tells us more about trills, which is what it wanted to achieve, but it ultimately ducks away from what Measure of a Man absolutely did. They demonstrated that Data has free will, that he has desires, that he constitutes a person. They came to that ending, and at the end he talks to the person who was trying to have him taken away and dismantled. They resolve it. In this episode, the resolution feels like a cheat to me, which is, it's unfortunate. And as you've described Anina and her arc and what she gets out of it, I think it was all very intentional. This was the story they wanted to tell.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, I find the ending so unsatisfying because it ducks all the big questions they've been asking.
Well, I never expected such an assessment, but you've surprised me all the way through this, Kat. You've constantly taken my cherished, crusty old preconceptions and memories of this episode and turned them on their head, which is why we do this podcast, because otherwise it would just be another old white guy talking about how much he loves Star Trek. And we've all heard enough of that.
Two old white people talking about Star Trek and how much I don't know about it. Winning.
It's slightly different, you know. Let's give it that at least. But thank you. That is such a refreshingly different look at this episode. I think you're absolutely right, and it does feel like it's kind of cheated itself with a bit more of a satisfying conclusion. I will just chalk that up to season 1 reluctance to lock too much into place. I guess they just didn't want to.
So I think it was a very ambitious episode. They wanted to walk right up to the important questions about being a Trill and to explore those. But as you say, they can't. If they make all of those decisions now, what's left to explore later? If we learn everything that there is to learn and we make legal decisions about what a Trill absolutely is and what it means to be a Trill, unless they decide to break that later, which they could also have done.
Which they could. But yeah,
they instead leave it open and make it a family drama and a drama about Anina and her role and the relationship between her and Curzon Dax, which is admittedly nice to have.
It is wonderful. That definitely. In the chat, I noticed that Nigel very much appreciates your assessment, so thank you, Nigel. And as he correctly points out, that this DS9 as a whole is great for lore building and world building for the wider Star Trek series, which always chafes me because it's not very well represented in other franchises. But never mind, that's one for a later episode. But I think
the only scene. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the only scene we've got left is the conversation between Jadzia Dax and
let's touch on that, because I'm glad they had this sequence, and it would have robbed the episode if they didn't have that chance to walk and talk and Anina to again summarize everything, which is Curzon Dax swore never to describe what happened that day. You weren't bound by it, and also the revelation that actually the general was a traitor after all. And
it was the rebels who murdered him because he betrayed the cause.
He was going to surrender.
Which again feels like a very nice way of letting Dax off the hook.
Yes, I've got to admit, that one I definitely bumped on. I was a bit like... I would have rather you'd have just left it that the guy was a good guy, and it was just, something else that led to him being killed.
But I think it's probably there to give us the emotional beat they wanted to hit, which is we've resolved it all and it's all okay. The guy is dead because he deserved. Effectively, they don't say it in so many words, but he's dead because he deserved it.
They absolutely.
He was the one who betrayed his
strongly
people.
Imply
treason gets you the death penalty. Even if he was tried by his own people, the rebels killed him. And now she is free of him, and she's free of having to pretend anymore if she chooses not to.
Do you think Anina would have told Ilon that the general was also a traitor as well as an adulterer?
I can only assume that she wouldn't, because the son is clearly, in his characterization, he's very officious, he's very bound to his father's memory. I assume that he believes the commonly held belief that the general was a great man, and his mother perhaps reasonably wants to maintain that for him. She wants him to be proud of his heritage.
She definitely says that she won't share it with wider Claystron society, doesn't she? In this speech, she says, nobody will ever know, doesn't she? So
yes. But yeah, we have to assume that the son's very disillusioned, both with his mother, because she's revealed that she had an affair with the person who he thought had killed his father, and with his father, who betrayed his people. So yeah, there might be more unfolding drama with Ilon deciding to go his own direction and let people know. But it's closed for us as far as we're concerned. The story ends there unless they brought it up in later episodes.
I can safely say they do not. So that's that. But
and at the very end of the conversation, Anina gives Dax permission to move on, because there could have been a lingering sense of, well, we had a relationship once. We can rekindle that now. But no, they don't go in that direction. That may have been a step too far for Star Trek in the 90s, maybe. I haven't seen all of it yet. But she says, live, Jadzia Dax. Live a long, fresh, and wonderful life. Which is nice. It's a permission to, she appreciates that Curzon Dax is now gone and she wishes well for new Dax and everything she might do.
And more than that, I think she releases Jadzia from any commitments that Curzon or the symbiont may have made. So the kind of the back theme of this, which is, we are responsible for our actions regardless of how long ago they were. At some point that has to have an expiry period. You have to be able to go, that was so long ago, I need to move on with my life. Because this whole episode has been focused around Jadzia being unable to act for herself because of a promise Curzon made.
That's a very good point. It's a choice that she made, but she felt duty bound by something that another person promised to do.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They literally say it, Anina says, but it was Curzon that committed towards secrecy, and Jadzia says, I felt it was important to honour. And it's like, that's wonderful. Perhaps not the most sensible decision if it means you're going to be executed.
Yes.
And the Dax symbiont, which you're meant to protect. You are the host. You appreciate that you are only there for a portion of the symbiont's life. But if you die, the symbiont will die. So what the hell?
But again, we have to assume that the decision was made by the pair of them, the part that remembers the relationship and the part that's honouring a promise that the other part remembers.
So again, we've observed some things here about philosophy and Trill psychology and honor and legacy, and it's all very complex. And I don't feel like we got the neatest resolution, but
it would have been an ambitious thing to have fully wrapped up in 45 minutes.
I absolutely agree. And more than that, I don't think Deep Space Nine is a show that will always give you the neatest solutions, as you will find as we work our way along.
But one thing I do like about that last scene is that those words from Inina, the live a long, fresh and wonderful life, those are the last words spoken in the episode, and usually we don't have a captain's log wrapping everything up and then a short epilogue.
Or a cheesy gag.
Or a cheesy gag.
Which we've both grated on the last couple of times those have cropped up. So I was very glad. I thought this was a very intelligent, heartfelt episode, and therefore I was glad they did choose to end on, as you say, a very heartfelt and significant line. It was a good little bow tie at the very top of the episode. No, I enjoyed that. Which brings us to the end of Dax, which was, I believe, episode 8?
It's either episode 7 or episode 8, depending on whether you think that Emissary was 1 or 2 parts.
This is something we're going to constantly bump on.
On Netflix, it's listed as episode 7 because Emissary is one long episode on Netflix. In some listings, it will be episode 8 because you have Emissary parts 1 and part 2.
Yes.
Which is going to it's going to be there for the rest of season 1.
That is going to throw us out, yes. In the internal chronology of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, it is classified as episode 8, which just helps nobody whatsoever. But we are at the end, so I guess.
And I've got just one other thing that I wanted to raise in relation to this episode, if we have time.
Yeah.
We've got time. It's only been 2 hours again.
Thank you, loyal viewers, all of you out there. You have been very good to us. Thank you.
This was my what the trek feeling about this episode. It occurred to me near the beginning, but as I told it back till now, given how long the Trill have been known to the Federation, and we know that Sisko was friends with Curzon Dax some 20 years previously, so it's been a bit of a while now, I'm surprised that there weren't any excitable Federation lawyers who have already got at the legal points raised in this episode. You would think that when a new species becomes known to the Federation, there's a branch of the Federation that instantly leaps into action, adding the knowledge of their legal processes to the Federation's databanks and trying to pinpoint where differences in laws and or species characteristics might cause problems down the road. And it just feels weird, given that it's been at least a couple of decades, that this is the first time anyone's gone, actually, if a Trill commits a crime in its previous body, does it still count? Is this the first time this has happened? And apparently it is, because Kira doesn't turn up any precedents.
She doesn't, actually. And I always thought that was weird, that Sisko said, go out and find out something about me, and she never came back with anything. She had, a nice bit of, being the interrogator herself, but...
I wonder whether there was a short scene written that had to be trimmed for time, because it's not an episode with a lot of long pauses in it. It does jog along a pace. So it's possible that either she came back and said there isn't anything, or there was a case, but it was decided against the favour of the Trill.
Yes, I think you are right, and they cut that, which is a shame for lovely Nana Visitor, who's such a great actress, and Kira, who's a wonderful character. But I think also they may have been worried about writing themselves into a corner, which is, of course, that would happen. Everything you've just described would make perfect bloody sense. And the only reason they didn't was because they wanted to make this episode happen. And also, Izzy is pointing out that there are spoilers coming up, and there are more episodes that will touch on this topic in an oblique way. But you're absolutely right. Normally, that would happen. I think the Trill have been members of the Federation for a very long time. Not one of the founding members, but certainly a very early member. So there is no reason this wouldn't have come up before. None whatsoever.
And whenever I encounter people who work for the Federation, they're all incredibly enthusiastic about what they do, and they all want to learn, and they all want to get ahead of the game. So it just feels unrealistic that you wouldn't have a whole fleet of young lawyers coming out of the academy and leaping on all of the xeno-legal stuff that they can.
Xeno-legal, what a great
I think that would be the term for it, wouldn't it?
I think it would, yeah. I think so. Chat and everyone out there, you'll have to look into it and let us know. But I think that sounds absolutely right.
But yeah, I think again though that's a piece of Star Trek world building that I have to assume at this point in my journey just it doesn't happen. They don't have lawyers in the future because the future's better.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. Indoor Cat there pointing out that according to background knowledge, the Trill joined the Federation in 2285, which was about the time of the Kirk movies.
Oh, right.
So,
yeah, fair. What in terms of the our characters' timeline, that's quite a long time
before the event in this episode. Or maybe just shy, because it's about 2365, 2366. So yeah, it's about 30 years off. So it's about 70 or 80 years ago the Trill joined the Federation. And Nigel pointing out, I wonder if Federation politics runs at the same pace as UK local governments. Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't care to ask the Trills to, repair the potholes in my road, because they might be like, oh, I'll get that sorted in like 3 hosts' time. And I'm like, you're kidding me, right? That's 300 years. Get out of here. You'll fix it sooner than that. So I guess general impressions then, Kat. I mean, we've done the Trek Nose, so did you come away happy or any overall impressions?
As usually with these episodes, even if I've been a bit disappointed on a first viewing, looking into how well structured it is, how well put together, how much is revealed about the characters with very minimal dialogue in some scenes, it is very well done. But again, I come across that I just feel that there's a big hole where resolution should be, and I think that's probably reasonable, to be honest. We can't ask them to resolve philosophical questions which relate to a new alien race that they've recently invented.
I can see what you mean.
It does still feel as if they tiptoed up to it and then tiptoed away from it. Yeah. And they don't, I think no one owns in the episode, so we still don't actually know what would happen if this were to occur. We'll send it off to Federation Legal, to Starfleet Legal, we'll get someone on it. They just drop it.
And they've got a huge backlog, because, the Trill have been in the Federation for decades and nobody's gotten around to this, so, we'll put it on the list to be looked at, right? But no promises. If it's urgent,
we'll get the person who's in charge of a whole space station to go and deal with it for a day.
That's what you need to do. They push everything off their desk and just do that one thing. That's the solution you need.
But no, it was an engaging episode. It was a very emotive episode, and I wasn't bored during it, even though I felt disappointed by the conclusion. I think it was very well carried out, and yeah, the acting was fantastic, both from guest actors and from the main cast.
Yeah, I think we can both agree with that. And I think that ultimately typifies this episode. This was more of a character development episode. Ultimately, we weren't meant to learn too much about Dax in this episode. We weren't meant to establish too much about Dax and the Trill in this episode. It was more about, developing that character, building that relationship with Sisko, and a little bit of courtroom drama sprinkled on top to make it Trek, And Nigel there, don't ask that question. Nigel's saying, I wonder how this situation will be covered under Trill law. That would be the obvious precedent. I mean, that would be the obvious precedent.
I mean, they brought a Trill into the room, but they didn't have him comment on how it would be handled.
How would you do this on your home world?
It's an obvious question to ask. Oh.
Okay.
But again, in the course of the episode, they do a good job of giving us such information that we don't always think to ask those questions.
That's true.
They kind of they seek to turn us away from them, and quite successfully. I didn't sit there watching it thinking, "What the heck are they doing? This is all obviously a complete waste of time." Because,
it didn't occur to us.
It's well done for what it is.
Yes, 100%. I think that's all we can take away from Star Trek. And I'm going to caution Izzy to keep spoilers under their belt. Thank you very much. You know, we could do anything to spoil Kat's appreciation of the show.
Izzy wants to say things.
Izzy really wants to say things, but the whole point...
8 years, Izzy. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Stop saying the time, my God. No, we're going to let Kat encounter each episode on their own time so that their initial impressions of each episode come through in that lovely way that runs counter to my own. You know, I've looked this episode up on Memory Alpha and TV Tropes already, which is just a boring way of looking at things. So I think we can come away conscious of the lack of resolution and conclusion, but enjoying the characterization that develops in this episode, would we say?
Except for Bashir, who's still a fuckboy.
That boy has a long way to go.
He's got so much to learn. I look forward to him becoming a grizzled, cynical old man before the end of the show. I'm betting that's what his arc is going to be. Placing my bets now.
No spoilers, but remember that Kat said that, and then when we get up to about season 7 and we see where Bashir is, we will revisit this moment. Okay, let's make
such thing as an eternal twink. He's got to.
Again, I'm gonna. There are some episodes coming up where that's really gonna put your theories to the test, or ultimately prove them. I just cannot wait to see what you think, Kat. Thank you, the Indoor Cat's going to remember this moment, but Kat, your impression of how Bashir develops is going to be fascinating.
Oh, and I'm looking forward to it. We've just been through an episode that I, at the end of it, wasn't especially excited by, and we still managed to talk about it for 2.25 hours because it's still interesting. Oh, damn it.
Every time I think, no, this is a short bottle episode, concepts we've already covered, it's not going to take us too long, we still do. I wonder, what I keep thinking is maybe by about like season 3 or 4, when there's not as much development characterization, we might fly through episodes a bit faster.
Yeah, maybe. When I'm used to it all, it's all a bit old hat and the characters are just doing what they do and I don't need to point it out every time. Yeah, maybe.
It will be interesting to see if that happens. But yes, I'm very conscious that we need to let everyone go. We need to let
it's a Monday night. Go. Oh, thank you very much for joining us for such a long time on a Monday. Talking about an episode of TV that came out 30 years ago.
We are so grateful to everyone who comments in chat. Izzy, Indoor Cat, Nigel, everyone. Tony Girl, I saw a comment earlier. We're very grateful to all of you for joining us, and please do keep your chat up because it's wonderful to involve you in our conversation. And I'm just, ready, kind of moving us towards wrapping up. I guess any closing thoughts that we haven't covered yet, Kat?
It's not as good as Measure of a Man, but it was all right.
Is anything as good as Measure of a Man? It's one of the best courtroom episodes they do.
Oh, it's got everything. It's not many episodes where you see a man's arm getting taken off.
He takes his arm off and then he switches the guy off. Wow, what a compelling argument.
Michael being a kind of unwanted, he doesn't want to be the villain, but he's got to be to fulfill his duty, and it's got everything. It's a great episode. If you haven't watched it, go and watch The Next Generation, Measure of a Man. It's a beautiful court, and it's actually a trial.
It actually is. It's not just a hearing. I did wonder how long it would be before you ended up extolling the virtues of TNG episodes in a DS9 podcast.
It's going to happen more often than not.
I thought so as well. We must go then. I shall release everyone. I shall thank Kat for being, as always, a wonderful host of this podcast. I shall thank Chat for being a wonderful audience. I shall put this on YouTube very soon, and we shall return in a couple of weeks' time with the next episode, I think.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Live long and prosper, and good night.